Chapter 1. Whenever the age of turmoil came, there would inevitably be shocking monsters born and suppress an era. They would lead the human race to a more brilliant glory. This was not a prophecy. It was the truth. This was the final truth that the human race had obtained after 12,000 years of development. After 12,000 years of development, the human race had developed from a weak race in a corner to one of the three peak races in the Milky Way galaxy. This relied not only on the advancement of science and technology. More importantly, it was the great kings who had left their names in the history of the human race. The divine king of serene prison, the divine king of sky, the divine king of flame, the divine king of dusk. These names were beliefs in the hearts of the human race. They helped the human race break the shackles one after another in times of crisis and open the sky one after another. They propped up the human sky with their shoulders and paved the human race's path with their flesh and blood. These existences were the greatest prophets and powerhouses in the history of the human race. Even if those legendary true gods appeared, no one could compare to them, because they were the kings among the gods. They were the peerless divine king. Whenever the human race was in danger, there would always be a divine king who would appear and lead the human race to the peak with invincible combat power that made the entire universe tremble. And now, it was 500 years since the last faith of the human race, the divine king of turmoil, had disappeared. Lu Feng, do you really think you're that good? What kind of legendary figure are you? Bah, if it weren't for your good parents, what would you be? In my eyes, you're just a piece of trash. Looking at the figure rolling back and forth while holding his stomach, Zhao Chong smiled disdainfully, took out a paper document, and handed it to Lu Feng. Okay, sign him. Let me think highly of you once. Looking at the contract, Lu Feng clenched his fists tightly. At this moment, he had the urge to use the final blow. However, he also understood that even if he used such means, he would not be a match for Zhao Chong. After all, Zhao Chong was much stronger than him. So in the end, he endured the pain and signed his name on it. Seeing that everything was done, Zhao Chong showed a happy smile. Finally, he looked mockingly at Lu Feng, who was trying to sit up, and turned around and left without any hesitation. Just as Zhao Chong left, a figure appeared beside him. Lu Feng knew the owner of this figure, and he knew him very well. After all, the two of them had been enemies since middle school. And this time, Zhao Chong dared to provoke him like this. Clearly, he was the one who incited him. Otherwise, Zhao Chong alone would not have dared to provoke him. The energy shield opened, and a figure rushed in. He quickly came in front of Lu Feng and helped him up. With a helpless tone, he said, Lu Feng, how could you just agree to him like this? You still don't know what kind of person Zhao Chong is. Why did you make that kind of bet? You know, the Federal University's exam is in 3 days. How could you be so impulsive? Although Zhao Chong is not a good person, he is a true middle-stage beginner warrior. His strength is at least 3 stars. You are still far from a beginner warrior. Your strength is not even 1 star. Why did you agree to his challenge? You just gave away the special recruitment quota like this. What will you do in the future? You are still so far away from a beginner warrior. You will definitely not pass the Federal University's exam before the college entrance exam. So, do you still want to go to the Federal University? Don't you see? All of this was deliberately arranged by Wang Chu. Otherwise, no matter how bold Zhao Chong is, he wouldn't dare to provoke you. How could you agree to everything so impulsively? Li Yongheng's tone became more and more agitated. In the end, there was even a faint roar. But from beginning to end, Lu Feng had a calm expression, as if the one who lost everything just now wasn't him. Grabbing Li Yongheng's hand, Lu Feng finally stood up. There was still a trace of sadness in his calm expression. Li Yongheng, you don't understand. The word trash is really too heavy. I can't bear it. If I lose this time, then so be it. After all, what he said was right. If it wasn't for my parents, I'm afraid the school wouldn't have given this special recruitment quota to me. Looking at Lu Feng's expression, Li Yongheng sighed deeply. In the end, he didn't say anything. He could only help Lu Feng up and walk out of school. Lu Feng, I advise you not to be too obsessed with warrior training. With your body, Even if you train for 10 years, you definitely won't be able to become a beginner warrior. I'm afraid you haven't even reached half a star. And the last barrier to breaking through a beginner warrior isn't something that can be broken easily. If you have the time, you might as well try to train your spiritual power. You should also understand that the status of psychic is countless times higher than that of a warrior. After leaving the school, Lu Feng didn't have any big problems anymore. And along the way, the two didn't speak. When they were about to separate, Li Yongheng finally couldn't help but open his mouth to persuade Lu Feng. Hearing this, Lu Feng just smiled bitterly and kept nodding. He didn't say anything. Seeing Lu Feng like this, Li Yongheng's face darkened. He said with a little anxiety, "In 3 days, the Federal University of Cymbidium branch will be conducting the final test. You've already lost the special feature quota to that bastard Zhao Chong. If you still can't break through the warrior level, then we really will have to separate in the future. The two of us grew up together. We agreed that we would go to university together. This time, you should listen to my advice. Don't always be so obsessed with the training of your body. Hurry up and use the last few days to train your spiritual power. Strive to pass the psychic test in 3 days." After saying this, Li Yongheng took out a tube of solution filled with blue light from his backpack. He looked at Lu Feng's astonished eyes and didn't hesitate too much. He directly stuffed the blue solution in his hand into Lu Feng's hand. "Lu Feng, when you agreed to the duel with Zhao Chong a few days ago, I already guessed today's outcome. So, I've already prepared everything. This is the spirit sobering potion I got from my dad. Although there's not much time left. But with the spirit sobering potion, I believe there's still hope for your spiritual power to increase a little. Although the psychic test is much more difficult than the warrior test. But with this bottle of spirit sobering potion, I think you might be able to pass." He paused for a moment, as if thinking of something. Li Yongheng continued to say to Lu Feng, "Kid, you must take it immediately when you go back. Don't waste it by any means. Also, for the next few days, focus on training your spiritual power. Don't keep thinking about the warrior level. Don't take today's humiliation to heart. After all, losing to a beginner warrior in the middle stage is nothing to be embarrassed about." After saying this, the two of them had already walked to the intersection of a street in a small district. Li Yongheng waved at Lu Feng, then turned and left. He looked at the sparkling blue liquid in his hand. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of gratitude and helplessness. "Psychic? Is there any possibility of me becoming a psychic in this life?" A trace of pain appeared on his face. Lu Feng knew his own situation. Others thought he was crazy about training because he liked warriors. But Lu Feng himself knew that the reason he trained so crazily wasn't because he didn't want to become a psychic, but because he really didn't have the possibility. Although he didn't have the slightest talent as a warrior, relatively speaking, as long as he worked hard, he still had hopes of becoming a beginner or even an intermediate warrior. But a psychic, with a deep sigh, Lu Feng turned and walked toward a luxurious villa in the small district. It was now 14033 AD, 12,007 years after the human race entered the universe era. In these 12,000 years, the human race's development could be said to be at a flying speed. From a small and weak race that lived in a corner 12,000 years ago to now spread throughout the entire Milky Way. As one of the 3 peak races of the Milky Way, the human race could be said to be at its peak, overlooking the Milky Way. It wasn't only the rapid development of technology that helped the human race bring about such glory. More importantly, it was the powerful warriors of the human race. It had developed to the present level. In addition to the technological equipment, the human race also had 2 major cultivation systems, which were warriors and psychics. The division of warriors was very obvious. In the Milky Way's commonly used strength stars as a unit, a warrior who could achieve 1 star in an all-out attack was considered a beginner warrior. Above beginner warriors, there were intermediate and advanced warriors. During this period, the difference in strength was 10 times. In other words, a warrior whose strength reached 100 stars was an advanced warrior. Above advanced warriors were the legendary warriors. Warriors, named after martial arts, had absolute strength. Legend had it that those who had become warriors could rely on some special life support devices to survive in the universe. And their peak strength was as high as hundreds of thousands of stars. Warriors were the ultimate dream of every warrior. It was the goal of their life. Of course, above warriors, there was the legendary Divine Marshal. Divine Marshal was a legend. It was a terrifying powerhouse who could completely break free from the shackles of gravity, survive in the universe without relying on anything, and even cultivate. Such a terrifying existence could easily destroy small planets with one punch. Even in the face of a universe-level battleship, they could easily crush it. And the peak existence of the Divine Marshal could look down on everything. With their physical body, they could look down on the heavens. It could be said that warriors who became Divine Marshal were difficult to destroy unless they used the ultimate deterrent weapon like the Interstellar Fortress. As for the peak Divine Marshal, they could only rely on the more powerful martial artists to punish them. As for psychics, the previous division was the same. Lu Feng only knew that there was a great psychic master above the advanced psychic master. As for the other levels, he really didn't know. However, if they were at the same level, psychics couldn't compete with warriors at all. Unless there were countless mecha battleships, once a psychic met a warrior, it was almost a sure death situation. And this was the reason why advanced psychics were precious and rare. Psychics had a very high status in the Federation. It could be said that even a beginner psychic had a higher status than an advanced warrior. After all, the ratio of psychics to warriors had reached an astonishing 1,000. Only one psychic out of 1,000 warriors could appear. This showed how precious psychics were. Chapter 2. Holding the spirit-sobering potion in his hand, Lu Feng slowly approached the luxurious villa with a heavy heart. His family could be considered a wealthy family in this area. Otherwise, the school would not have given the few special admission spots to a trash with no cultivation talent like him. After walking for a short while, he arrived at the villa. After verifying his identity, Lu Feng walked in. He knew that his parents should not be back yet. Both of them were high-ranking members of BUCC. Every year, except for certain holidays, they rarely returned home. He opened the door and threw his backpack on the table. Lu Feng lay down on the soft water sofa. After a moment of silence, he reached out his right hand and gently rubbed his forehead. Looking at the spirit-sobering potion in his left hand, he groaned. Is this the only way I can live my life? Although he had lost everything today, Lu Feng was not too depressed. Lu Feng was already used to it. Over the years, he had tried countless times and failed countless times. Thus, he no longer harbored any hope for his own aptitude. How many years has it been? I can't believe that I still can't do it. I can't be a psychic, and I can't even be a warrior. It seems that I can only be an ordinary person for the rest of my life. But my parents are high-ranking members of BUCC. With them around, I can live comfortably for the rest of my life. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. However, this smile was full of self-mockery. The next moment, Lu Feng picked up a virtual reality helmet from the sofa and skillfully put it on. He then quickly entered a virtual space. Lu Feng was a genius, a true genius. Unfortunately, his genius was not in the field of psychic or warrior cultivation. No one knew how terrifying his comprehension ability was. Although he could not become a psychic, he might not even have the talent to become a warrior. However, this did not stop him from liking these things. Lu Feng had watched many videos on the Sky Network. Many of the moves and control methods in the videos were learned in one go. He could even draw inferences about other things. This kind of talent was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. Think about it. If both sides were fighting to their limits, and one of the opponents suddenly used your move, or even improved it to perfection, then the situation would be, unfortunately, the heavens seemed to be fair. It gave Lu Feng unparalleled and terrifying talent, but at the same time made it impossible for him to become a powerhouse. Therefore, no matter how deep his comprehension was, his final achievement would only be that of a genius teacher in the Federation. Lu Feng was very dismissive of these. In his eyes, if he couldn't become a powerhouse, then he might as well be a rich kid and enjoy his life. However, even though that was what he thought, Lu Feng still liked to fight. Therefore, the virtual battle space had become one of the places he frequented besides the Sky Network. After activating the connection, he instantly entered a scene. Looking at the familiar scene in front of him, Lu Feng took a deep breath. He looked at the list of challenges. In the end, he chose a challenger who had a 93% winning rate. Although he was considered a trash in the real world, in the virtual battle space, Lu Feng was a famous powerhouse on the planet. In the entire Cymbidium virtual battle space, he was definitely one of the top few people. He had fought more than 5,000 battles, and his winning rate was as high as 99%. Such a winning rate allowed him to be ranked 105th on the battle ranking list. One must know that the entire population of the Crimson Blue planet was close to 1 billion, and almost 10% of them liked to fight in the virtual battle space. In other words, Lu Feng was ranked 105th among the 100 million users of the entire Cymbidium. This was undoubtedly very shocking and terrifying. As the system's countdown ended, the scene changed, and Lu Feng finally entered the battlefield. His opponent was a warrior ranked 1,348th on the battle ranking list. Such a result was also very terrifying. Soon, the 30 seconds of preparation time ended. At this moment, both of them began to move quickly. In the virtual battle space, everyone's level was the same. There was no real difference in level. There was only a competition of fighting skills. However, those high-level warriors, even if they had the same level of strength as a beginner warrior, were still much stronger. After all, their control and fighting skills were there, and these would not change when their level was lowered. When their level was lowered, they could play with almost any low-level warrior. And Lu Feng was able to defeat many people at the top of the battle ranking list without being a warrior. Being ranked 105th on the Cymbidium battle ranking list was enough to show his terrifying fighting talent. Looking at the person rushing towards him, Lu Feng was unusually calm. From his opponent's movements, he could analyze that his opponent in the real world was at least a high-level warrior, and it was very likely that he was an intermediate warrior who had comprehended a cultivation method. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to have such skillful and fast movements and sharp willpower. As if taking advantage of the moment when Lu Feng was lost in thought, a powerful punch flew towards Lu Feng. This attack was filled with countless variability, and it seemed to fuse many kinds of skills and essence into it. This was the challenger's strongest attack, and he wanted to use this powerful attack to directly knock down Lu Feng. After all, in his opinion, Lu Feng was a true high-level warrior. If it was someone else facing such a punch, even if they grasped its trajectory, the result would still not change, or they would directly fail. However, as a peerless expert who had almost entered the top 100 of the Cymbidium's virtual battle ranking list, Lu Feng directly ignored him. In the next moment, just as the powerful killing blow was about to arrive, Lu Feng had already strangely appeared behind the challenger. And the challenger was clearly not used to Lu Feng's strange dodging and sudden appearance. He actually appeared to be stunned for a moment, and it was at this moment that Lu Feng keenly grasped. A perfect arc appeared at the corners of Lu Feng's mouth. In the next moment, Lu Feng actually unleashed the same attack. This was a nearly identical punch. If there was a difference, it would be that Lu Feng's punch was actually even more perfect than his own. There was almost no flaw in it anymore. With one punch, the figure was sent flying far away. At this moment, the figure on the ground began to turn illusory and finally completely disappeared. Facing an intermediate-level warrior, facing the top 1,500 experts of the Cymbidium's hundreds of millions of users, Lu Feng only used one attack, and in such a short time, completely defeated his opponent. His terrifying battle talent could be seen at a glance. Victory. Time spent, 6 seconds. Degree of injury, 0. Degree of death, 100. The system determined that this was the last attack, and the opponent was instantly killed. A familiar voice appeared beside Lu Feng's ear. The screen once again returned to the selection interface. At this moment, The virtual battle space's announcement had already appeared on the video of their battle just now. For the top 100 people on the battle ranking, every battle of theirs would be directly recorded by the virtual battle space. It could be said that it was a live broadcast. This was the treatment of an expert. And because of Liu Feng's terrifying win rate, his fame was much greater than the average top 30 people. Although his opponent today was only ranked in the top 1,000, it did not prevent people from paying attention to it. Therefore, a few seconds after the battle ended, the video of the previous battle had already spread on the Tianluo, setting off waves of small waves. Before this, Liu Feng had to fight a few battles almost every day. But today, because of the complete failure of the confrontation with Zhao Chong, Liu Feng lost his usual interest. In the end, he chose to quit. A few seconds later, Liu Feng left the virtual battle space. He took off the virtual helmet on his head. Liu Feng leaned on the sofa. After a long time, he sat up again. Picking up the spirit sobering potion in front of him, Liu Feng was silent for a moment. He knew that although he would never be able to break through as a psychic and become a beginner psychic, but with the help of the spirit sobering potion, it was still very possible for him to smoothly pass the assessment. After all, this was the spirit sobering potion. The spirit sobering potion was considered a very famous potion in the Federation that could increase one's spiritual power. If an extremely talented person took it, they would probably break through immediately and become a beginner psychic. Of course, even if they did not have the spirit sobering potion, they could still break through. It just took a little longer. This spirit sobering potion was also extremely precious. Most people would probably only be able to see it on the Tianluo. After all, this thing was a prohibited item controlled by the Federation's military department. Li Yongheng. Oh, Li Yongheng, what should I say? You brought this thing here. Aren't you afraid that your father will beat you to death? Li Yongheng was Liu Feng's best friend. From what he could remember, the first friend he had made when he and his parents had arrived here was Li Yongheng. The two of them had been best friends since elementary school, all the way through middle school and high school. This was a friendship that spanned more than 10 years. Liu Feng's family was rich, very rich. Li Yongheng's family was different. His family had power. His father was the deputy commander of an interstellar corps in the military forces of this planet, although he was not considered much in the hierarchy of power on this planet. However, in this city, he could be regarded as someone with absolute power. Apart from the mayor of the city, the warrior, and the president of the Psychic Association, who could suppress him, the others were at most on equal footing with him. And Li Yongheng, as Li Haiping's only child, was able to get a bottle of the spirit's sobering potion. However, this was nothing compared to those who had great power. Although Liu Feng's family was rich, this thing was not something that could be bought easily. At least, as far as Liu Feng knew, his parents should not have been able to get it for him. Otherwise, given how much his parents loved him, they would have gotten it a long time ago. Chapter 3. Sigh. I can't let his good intentions go to waste. Although I'm not destined to become a psychic, it shouldn't be a problem to pass the test with the help of this spirit-sobering elixir. After taking the spirit-sobering elixir, it could increase the user's spiritual power. Although it still couldn't break through the final barrier, this was already pretty good. At the very least, it could help Liu Feng reach the standard to pass the test. Liu Feng looked at the sparkling blue liquid in his hand. Finally, he pulled out the bottle cap and drank it in one gulp. To be honest, the taste isn't bad. Lightly licking the remnants of the elixir at the corner of his mouth, Liu Feng savored the lingering taste. But Li Yongheng's father is really something. My family can be considered a wealthy family. But this spirit-sobering elixir isn't something that can be obtained so easily. I didn't expect that kid to steal it directly from his father. Sigh. In the Federation, these military officers are still the most popular. After saying this, Liu Feng suddenly felt a wave of sleepiness wash over him. He understood that this was the beginning of the elixir's reaction. Without much panic, he lightly pressed a button beside the sofa. Instantly, the sofa transformed into a bed. Lying on it, Liu Feng sank into a deep sleep. But no one saw that in the instant Liu Feng closed his eyes, countless resplendent lights and sparkling runes suddenly appeared on his body. Lu Feng stared dumbfoundedly at his surroundings. At this moment, the only question in his mind was, where is this place? Where the hell is this? Isn't it the same as sleeping unconsciously after taking the spirit's sobering elixir? How'd I end up in this damn place? The spirit's sobering elixir was precious, but its effects were widely known. After taking this elixir, the person would enter a state of extreme relaxation. Unknowingly, it would be as if they were in a dream. By the time they woke up, they would have finished absorbing the elixir's effects. But now, looking at this pitch-black space, Lu Feng couldn't connect the two together. He understood that since he had just taken the spirit-sobering elixir, this place should be the depths of his consciousness. But the depths of this space of consciousness were too different from what was recorded. Could it be that Li Yongheng brat brought a bottle of expired stuff? You're trying to kill me. Lu Feng's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. At this moment, this was the only possibility he could think of. That unique color was indeed unique to the spirit-sobering medicine. There was no mistaking it. As for Li Yongheng trying to harm him, Lu Feng didn't even think about it. What the hell is this place? Is there anyone? He shouted, but in an instant, his voice was swallowed up by the darkness. There was no response at all. He stood in the same place, feeling depressed. It was pitch black everywhere. Even if he wanted to leave, he couldn't. Looks like it's some expired medicine. I just hope that when Li Yongheng can't find me in a few days, he'll come visit me. Maybe I can still be saved then. With a mournful face, Lu Feng could only place his hopes on that unreliable friend of his. To tell the truth, Lu Feng believed that he was still very optimistic about life. Although he had an unparalleled talent for comprehension, he couldn't cultivate. If this happened to someone else, they would probably really be depressed. But Lu Feng didn't. At least he was still striving, hoping that he could become a warrior in his lifetime, even if it was just a beginner. Previously, when he had lost the specially recruited quota to Zhao Chong, Lu Feng hadn't been too emotional. What he felt was just a great deal of unwillingness. For example, when faced with this kind of hopeless situation, his reaction wasn't pessimistic despair, but rather a last shred of hope. That goddamn Li Yongheng. He actually gave me a bottle of expired medicine. Now I can only stay in this godforsaken place, waiting for someone to come and save me. Why am I so unlucky? The spirit-sobering medicine was the same as other medicines. It had a time limit. Generally, when it expired, there would be adverse effects. Lu Feng knew a little about this dark space in front of him. This was his mental space. Entering here meant one thing. That was his physical body was already dormant, absorbing the medicine, but his mind was still awake. If it weren't for this, he wouldn't have entered here. Luckily, I've heard of the spirit-sobering medicine before, and I even looked it up on the Heavenly Network. Otherwise, I would have been scared to death this time. Lu Feng muttered to himself, squatting in the mental space, helplessly looking at the darkness around him. When the spirit-sobering medicine expired, there would be adverse effects. And a large portion of people were like Lu Feng at this moment. Their bodies were dormant, but their minds were awake. In this kind of state, they were generally unable to wake up on their own. Unless someone awakened his body, that would be the only way. Lu Feng had calculated. There were still 3 days until the advanced examinations. And in these 3 days, when the body was dormant, there wouldn't be much danger. Although he hadn't become a beginner warrior, after all these years of training, his body wasn't something an ordinary person could compare to. There shouldn't be any problem at all if he didn't eat or drink for 3 days. Previously, when I saw these kinds of reports on the Heavenly Network, they were still mocking those who used expired medicine. Being trapped in this dark world with a clear mind for a few days, I'm afraid anyone would break down. Who would have thought that not long after, such a good thing would fall on me? Looks like people really shouldn't take joy in other people's misfortune. With a bitter face, Lu Feng stood up in boredom, then started practicing the body training fist technique taught by the school. Lu Feng knew that no matter how much he practiced here, there wouldn't be any effect. But if he didn't do this, he was really afraid that he would suffocate to death. After practicing once, Lu Feng sat in the dark without a care for his image. In here, he couldn't feel tired, because this was the mental space. All of his movements wouldn't use up his physical strength at all. Sigh. When can I truly become a warrior? I don't know if I can pass this time's psychic assessment. Lu Feng shouted and lay down helplessly. After an unknown amount of time, when Lu Feng really felt that he was about to break down, he suddenly discovered something strange. At this moment, he sat up and looked ahead quietly. He didn't know how much time had passed, but gradually, Lu Feng finally saw it. In that hazy darkness, there was a slow change. Although it was extremely slow, it was really changing. In that distant place, there was a hazy change. It was as if a kind of chaos had just been born, and countless indescribable wills were slowly condensing. Then, in an unknown distance away in space and time, something appeared. Do you still remember your persistent protection? Have you forgotten the promise you made? The path you walked has been lost. Have you forgotten the promise you made? The battle ahead has never stopped. Do you remember the blood they spilled everywhere? Wake up, wake up, return to your peak existence, return to your immortal journey. Use your fists, use your blood to break the last shackles, break the eternal imprisonment. Lu Feng's eyes were lifeless. An ancient and desolate funeral song rang out and lingered in his ears, causing him to go blank temporarily. After a long time, he slowly recovered. Lu Feng's expression didn't show any shock or surprise. As of this moment, it was almost as if Lu Feng were no longer himself. He walked quietly, and with a single step, he could traverse millions upon millions of kilometers. It was as if he were traversing boundless space-time to reach the other shore, to the place where everything had been born. What exactly is all this? Why do I feel such a sense of familiarity? As he muttered to himself, his eyes were filled with unconcealable sorrow and indescribable confusion. In the next moment, all the confusion and sorrow in his eyes disappeared. What replaced it was a kind of shock, a kind of extreme shock. This was because Lu Feng had seen it. In front of him, in this primordial world, a startling change had occurred. After passing through layers of dense fog and passing through time and space, a massive object had suddenly appeared in that deep era. It had been born. It had been nurtured from the primordial chaos and was born in an instant. Then, it seemed to have penetrated the firmament and forcefully occupied the boundless sky and earth. Lu Feng raised his head. However, all he could see was the top hidden in the endless haze. At the moment, he couldn't see the entirety of this massive object. What he could see was only a small section under the haze. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He was filled with an indescribable shock. This terrifying and gigantic thing gave him too much of shock. This terrifying object was many times larger than the huge interstellar fortresses he had seen on the Sky Network. Based on what he could tell, an interstellar fortress wouldn't even be 1/10,000th of this thing. This was simply too terrifying. One had to know that an interstellar fortress was formed directly from the transformation of a planet. There was no need to mention its massive size. However, just the exposed part of this thing was tens of thousands of times larger than an interstellar fortress. This was simply unbelievable. In the next moment, when the ancient behemoth seemed to have been completely born, a crack suddenly appeared on the exposed part of it. No, this couldn't be considered a crack. Lu Feng looked at the cracked existence and the main body that was gradually becoming clearer. He took a deep breath. The crack that had appeared in front of him was actually a door. It was an indescribable, huge door that seemed to be the door to heaven and earth. This massive object wasn't an unknown object at all. It was actually a terrifying and majestic pagoda. What the F*CK is this thing? Chapter 4. After swallowing hard, Lu Feng finally couldn't help but swear. Pagoda? He knew about that thing. Many planets conquered by the Federation had this kind of thing. It was said that this thing was left behind by the prehistoric civilization. On the mother planet Earth, there were many palaces that were said to have been left behind in ancient times. However, was there any way to compare the two? Lu Feng shook his head when he compared the palaces he had seen on the Sky Network to the terrifying thing in front of him. The difference between the two was not just the terrifying size, but also the aura, the level of luxury and delicacy. Compared to the sky-reaching Futu in front of him, the pagodas he had seen in the past were like children's toys. There was simply no comparison between the two. Lu Feng hesitated for a long time as he looked at the open door. In the end, he gritted his teeth and walked over. For some reason, Lu Feng felt that there was an inexplicable call from the Futu Pagoda. Although it wasn't strong, it was a call from the bottom of his heart that he simply couldn't ignore. After walking for an unknown amount of time, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of the door. He stopped and quietly sized up the sky-reaching Futu. Looking at the sky-reaching Futu up close, Lu Feng felt its greatness and terror even more. He couldn't imagine what kind of civilization could create such a miraculous thing. Humans were one of the top 3 races in the universe, and their greatest achievement was nothing more than the sky-reaching Star Fortress, the largest interstellar fortress in history. The sky-reaching Star Fortress was the crystallization of human technology over the past few hundred years. In the past, Lu Feng might have thought that it was the most terrifying and powerful thing in the entire Milky Way, or even the entire universe. However, after seeing the sky-reaching Futu, he understood that the sky-reaching Star Fortress was nothing compared to what he saw. The sky-reaching Futu was exquisite, incomparably exquisite. Lu Feng didn't know what material the ancient wall was made of, but there was a hazy light on it. Lu Feng could feel a terrifying energy fluctuation coming from it. This feeling was many times stronger than that of Li Yongheng's father. After all, Li Yongheng's father was a martialist who surpassed a high-level warrior. Such an existence was like a god to the current Lu Fenglai. However, he felt that the power emanating from the wall was many times stronger than that of the former. He reached out and wanted to touch it, but in the end, he withdrew his hand. Lu Feng felt a great threat from it. Although this was the depths of his consciousness, Lu Feng was afraid that his soul would be harmed. If that happened, he would never be able to wake up in this lifetime. As he continued looking at the sky-reaching Star Fortress, Lu Feng saw many things that he had never seen before. Some of them were creatures that were indescribably huge and majestic. Apart from them, there were also creatures that looked like humans. However, Lu Feng didn't dare to be sure that they were really humans. Even though they were just relief sculptures, Lu Feng could feel a terrifying power from them. It was a power that surpassed any kind of terror and invincibility. Could it be that these people are all the Divine King? Lu Feng was a little sluggish. He didn't know why, but the moment he saw those human-shaped sculptures, he thought of the Divine King. Because in Lu Feng's perception, except for the Divine King, no other existence could compare with the existence in those sculptures. Above, he couldn't see anything. It was hazy, a kind of hazy that seemed to be able to block everything. Finally, Lu Feng stopped sizing him up. He looked at the giant door before him, gritted his teeth, and took a step forward. He still walked in. Looking at this chaotic space, Lu Feng was at a loss. He thought about the existence that could exist in here and imagined many things. But he absolutely didn't expect that there was another space inside, an incomparably huge space with no end in sight. But in the next moment, Lu Feng came to his senses. Because in front of him, in this chaotic space, a shocking change was born. In a trance, he didn't know when it started, but a giant that reached the sky appeared. His body was tall and sturdy, countless times larger than any race in the universe that Lu Feng knew of. He stood in the chaos, as if he was the only overlord in the endless space and time, giving off a feeling of absolute invincibility. Lu Feng didn't know if he was tens of thousands of meters tall, hundreds of thousands of meters tall, or even millions of meters tall. But the feeling he gave to Lu Feng was that he was big, incomparably huge. The appearance of a giant should have been very terrifying, but Lu Feng didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. He watched quietly, and in the distance, the terrifying giant finally began to change. The giant sat cross-legged in the void, and in this chaotic space, countless terrifying tribulations were born. In Lu Feng's view, Many of these tribulations were enough to easily destroy a planet. But when these terrifying tribulations fell on the giant, they didn't have the slightest effect, and the giant didn't leave in the midst of these tribulations. He actually carried out an inexplicable cultivation in the midst of this destruction. Lu Feng could see that the giant's body began to slowly transform, and a powerful aura gradually appeared. The color of his body also began to slowly change, evolving into a bronze color. Finally, after an unknown period of time, this giant finally completely turned into a bronze color. In the next moment, the bronze color shrank. The giant returned to his previous appearance. But Lu Feng knew that he had changed. He had become stronger and more terrifying than before. When everything was completed, in the chaotic space, an even more powerful tribulation appeared, even more terrifying and unimaginable. And the giant once again stood in the middle of the tribulation and continued to cultivate. This time, his body transformed once again. In addition to becoming more powerful, the color of his body began to change again. Within the bronze color, there was a faint trace of golden light. When his entire body turned golden, the cultivation was finally completed. At this time, the giant gave Lu Feng an endless feeling of oppression, and it made his soul tremble. The cycle repeated, and endless tribulations appeared, and this time it could almost be called a true apocalyptic disaster. The giant changed again, and a purple light appeared in his golden body. After a long time, when the cultivation was completed, his body completely changed, turning into a terrifying noble body that was tinged with purple after gold. When the fourth transformation began, Lu Feng couldn't describe the terror of the tribulation born in the chaotic space. In the face of such a tribulation, human technology had probably lost any resistance because this tribulation was actually countless stars falling. Although they didn't seem big, Lu Feng felt that each of them was a true giant planet. They smashed down on the giant's body. At this time, the giant's flesh and blood bloomed, and the purple-gold color began to collapse. However, he didn't die. Instead, he underwent an even more powerful transformation. By the time everything was completed, the giant had completely changed again. Although he still looked the same, there wasn't even a trace of color. But the feeling he gave Lu Feng was like a star, an incomparably huge and terrifying star that could crush any star or even the universe. In an instant, the fifth transformation occurred. This time, it was as if the entire universe began to be destroyed. This kind of tribulation was unstoppable. However, the giant resisted it. The destructive power didn't destroy the giant in the end. Instead, it made him even more powerful. His body seemed to contain a taste of the end of the world. Lu Feng couldn't describe such a giant. In his opinion, such a powerful existence could only be compared to the legendary strongest Overlord that only appeared once every 1,000 years, the Divine King. Although he didn't know how powerful the Divine King was, the feeling the giant gave Lu Feng at this moment was actually the Divine King. There was no basis for it and no reason. He took deep breaths. Finally, as expected, the change occurred once again. It was an indescribable feeling. There wasn't any image of a tribulation, but Lu Feng understood that the tribulation had appeared. It seemed to exist in the unseen world. It seemed to be an invisible killing, an invisible destruction. This time, the giant suffered a heavy injury that he had never suffered before. However, he still continued to cultivate in silence. After an unknown number of years, the giant opened his eyes again. However, this time, he had completely transformed, becoming a truly unrivaled existence, an unrivaled figure. Overlooking the world, he was like the original demon of all living creatures. Unparalleled. Although he didn't move, Lu Feng knew that his strength was no longer something that could be described with words. Just sitting cross-legged seemed to explain the meaning of greatness, describing the concept of invincibility. Gradually, the chaos disappeared. Everything started to disappear slowly. The giant's figure slowly faded and completely disappeared into the void. Just as Lu Feng was feeling puzzled, something suddenly appeared in his mind. A moment later, his eyes were dazed, and he seemed to be in a daze. However, his lips were still speaking. Great demon, true body, bronze body, great demon, golden body, great demon, purple gold, great demon, star, great demon, true body. After an unknown amount of time, Lu Feng finally woke up. His eyes were no longer confused, because at this moment, there was only a kind of shock in his eyes, a kind of speechless shock. This is actually a cultivation method. It's actually such a heaven-defying cultivation technique. The great demon true body. So it's called the great demon true body. Chapter 5. Just as Lu Feng was quietly comprehending the great demon true body, a shocking wave of energy once again came over and woke Lu Feng up. He lifted his head and looked at the chaotic void in front of him. Shock was written all over his face once again. This was because a figure had appeared in the center of the chaotic void. Unlike the towering giants that had appeared before, this figure was so quiet that it was no different from an ordinary human being. Even the size of its body was the same. However, it was like the only light in the endless darkness. It was so dazzling that no one could ignore it. Even though they were separated by an unknown distance, Lu Feng was still able to see him at a glance. At the moment, the figure was also quietly cultivating. After a while, the chaotic star sea on his side started to churn as he absorbed an endless amount of energy. Finally, after absorbing a certain amount, his aura calmed down. Lu Feng had a complicated look in his eyes as he watched the distant figure. He could sense it. The aura of the figure was almost as strong as the giant that had condensed the copper-bodied great demon. The only difference was that the strength of this figure seemed to be on the spiritual level. As for the towering giant, it was an external invincibility of the physical body. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He had already figured it out. It's another world-shaking cultivation technique. What the hell is going on here? In the distance, the absorption force came once again. The aura of the figure also started to rise slowly. When it was finally completed, it had already reached a certain limit. At the moment, its power was so similar to the golden body great demon in the great demon true body that it was almost on par with. Then, the area of the absorption of the chaotic void became larger and larger. The aura of the figure also became stronger and stronger. Purple gold great demon, star great demon, apocalyptic great demon. When the entire endless chaotic void was absorbed and turned into energy that flowed into the figure, the strongest realm appeared. At this moment, Lu Feng felt as if he had seen that last moment again, that towering giant. A realm comparable to the great demon true body. The chaotic void disappeared. The figure disappeared. Everything disappeared. And in Lu Feng's mind, something else appeared once again. The primordial sutra. Nurture God Realm, Fusion God Realm, Transformation God Realm, Ascended God Realm, Perfection God Realm, Primordial God Realm. In the living room of the villa, on the waterbed, Lu Feng, who was in deep sleep, suddenly opened his eyes. At this moment, an indescribable light flashed through his eyes. It was filled with endless vicissitudes and a deep weariness. But after a moment, all the feelings disappeared completely, replaced by a kind of incomparable determination. He stretched out his arm and looked at his body quietly. Then Lu Feng clenched his fists tightly. He knew that everything had changed. He had completely changed. Great Devil True Body, the Primordial Sutra. It's done. The condensation of the primordial body and the creation of the initial God domain have been completed. I can finally cultivate and become a powerhouse. Lu Feng was pleasantly surprised. He did not know how much time had passed in that dark space. It seemed like a moment, but it could also be 10,000 years or 10 million years. However, he finally succeeded and completed all the transformations. But in the next moment, Lu Feng's expression suddenly changed, and he exclaimed, "What is this? Why is it so smelly?" Lu Feng did not know when it started, but a thick layer of black filth was attached to Lu Feng's body. An indescribable stench came from it, making him feel a little dizzy. Temporarily forgetting the surprise brought by the breakthrough, Lu Feng rushed to the bathroom and began to wash up. Half an hour later, when the stench finally stopped, Lu Feng returned to the living room. The water stains on his body had been blown dry. Lu Feng was naked and sat on the water sofa casually. His expression gradually calmed down. Lu Feng sat there peacefully for an hour. When he finally woke up, a completely relaxed expression appeared on his face. Looking at his watch, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Lu Feng knew that although a lot of time had passed in that deep space of consciousness, in reality, not even 3 hours had passed. However, these 3 hours had changed Lu Fenglai's life. Lu Feng understood that from tomorrow onwards, he was no longer the Lu Feng of the past. He was a brand new Lu Feng who was destined to become a true powerhouse. In the space of consciousness, Lu Feng completed the most difficult step, which was the foundation building of the great devil true body and the primordial scripture. From now on, he could cultivate these two heaven-defying techniques. The shackles that had restricted his body and soul for 18 years had finally been completely shattered. In the future, he would have a smooth path. As long as he had perseverance, then those obstacles in the past would no longer be his obstacles. Lu Feng gradually sat up, but his eyes still carried a trace of pondering. The cultivation of the great devil true body is too harsh. It was no wonder that it would take decades or even hundreds of years to reach the great accomplishment stage of those realms. If it wasn't for the existence of technology, I'm afraid that even if I cultivated until my death, I still wouldn't be able to reach the third level. Fortunately, we humans have technology. Those pressure points and harsh environments that couldn't be found in the records are not a problem for me at all. As long as I have money, those environments can be created at any time. With these conditions, I'm afraid that it won't be long before I can cultivate to the first level of the copper body great devil. As for the primordial scripture, that plaything is the same as the great devil true body. As long as I have money and get more potions, it can be completely like sitting on an interstellar battleship, rapidly improving. This technique is heaven-defying enough. However, when it comes to burning money, it's also heaven-defying. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were becoming more and more excited. Both of them were heaven-defying supreme techniques. Although Lu Feng didn't know their origins, and they just suddenly appeared in the depths of his consciousness, Lu Feng knew that whether it was the great devil true body or the primordial scripture, they were both truly heaven-defying techniques. As long as he could cultivate them successfully, then he would surpass any existence and become a true peerless expert of a human race. Of course, a peerless technique was naturally not that easy to cultivate. The more heaven-defying it was, the harder it was to cultivate it. For example, if he wanted to cultivate these two supreme techniques, the time required would easily be hundreds or thousands of years. Lu Feng didn't have that much time to cultivate. However, according to what was written, he believed that as long as he spent money, he could completely create the corresponding environment, which could completely allow his cultivation to rapidly improve. This was simply a supreme technique that was tailor-made for the current human race. Casually opening the Skylink on his wrist, Lu Feng looked at the time and calculated a little. For the first time, a serious expression appeared in his eyes. There are still 2 days before the exam. In these 2 days, if I get more low-grade medicine, I can completely cultivate the first stage of the primordial scripture to the minor success stage. At that time, passing the exam shouldn't be a problem. Thinking of this, Lu Feng became more and more excited. Once the first stage of the primordial scripture reached the minor success stage of the first stage of the primordial scripture, then he could at least break through to become a beginner psychic master. At that time, he could pass the psychic master examination and enter the Federal University of Higher Education. According to what was written, whether it was the great devil true body or the primordial scripture, as long as he completed the foundation, then he could definitely easily cultivate the first stage to the minor success stage. The minor success stage corresponded to beginner psychic masters and warriors. With a light jump, he jumped down from the waterbed. Lu Feng ran out of the room like the wind. 20 minutes later, in front of the counter of the ZTT pharmaceutical store, Lu Feng took out the BUCC high-grade payment card from his waist and painfully swiped 110,000 yuan. Then, he picked up the dozens of bottles of medicine on the counter and left as fast as he could under the strange gaze of the salesperson. He jogged all the way back home. At this moment, Lu Feng was drenched in sweat. However, this sweat wasn't because he was tired. The medicine that Lu Feng bought were all beneficial to psychic master's cultivation. However, the effects of these medicines were targeted at people who had yet to become beginner psychics. Generally, these medicines would be of some use before one became a psychic master, but the effect wouldn't be very big. Many people would use them, but the quantity would be at most 2 or 3 bottles. After all, after using it once, the effects of the medicine would be a lot weaker. People like Lu Feng, who bought more than 10 bottles of the same medicine in one go, were really rare. When he reached home, Lu Feng didn't stay in the living room. He went straight to his room. He knew that he would have to spend the next 2 days cultivating in his room. After opening a bottle of green medicine, Lu Feng took a deep breath. Finally, he opened the bottle cap and drank it in one gulp. In an instant, he started to cultivate according to the method recorded on the first level of the Origin Sutra. After a few minutes, Lu Feng opened his eyes. There was a strange look in his eyes. It was a mixture of shock and surprise. Why is the Origin Sutra so scary? It says that one can absorb all the power of heaven and earth to strengthen one sea of consciousness. But it doesn't say that the speed of absorption is so abnormal. The speed at which humans absorb medicine was directly proportional to the amount of energy contained in the medicine. An ordinary person would need no less than 2 hours to absorb the medicine in his hand. Even a beginner psychic would need at least an hour. However, Lu Feng had completed it in less than 10 minutes. This speed was 5 times slower than a beginner psychic's. This speed was unbelievable. Chapter 6. Even an intermediate psychic's absorption speed wouldn't be much faster than mine. The primordial scripture is too abnormal. As long as I have enough financial support, my advancement speed as a psychic will probably be dozens of times faster than those at the same level. Even compared to those geniuses from families with god-grade warriors, I won't be too far off. Nowadays, humans were very particular about genes. After a cultivator reached the divine level, their genes would go through a metamorphosis and reach an unimaginably perfect level. Similarly, the descendants of god-grade warriors were born with a talent that was more suitable for cultivation than ordinary people. Lu Feng knew that there were 8 great families in the Federation. The wealth and power they controlled was frightening. Among the 8 great families, 6 of them were descendants of the Divine King. The bloodline of the Divine King. Even if the bloodline of the descendants was extremely thin, they would probably be several times more powerful than ordinary geniuses. However, thanks to the existence of the Origin Scripture, Lu Feng's cultivation speed was still far from being comparable to the descendants of godly kings. However, he was now comparable to the geniuses of the clans that had produced god-grade martialists. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng spent more than half a day to finally refine all the medicines he had bought. At this moment, Lu Feng felt that his spirit was surprisingly good. Looking at the space around him, although it hadn't changed in the slightest, Lu Feng felt as if everything had changed. The things of the past were still the things of the past, but they seemed to be filled with spirituality. They were filled with a sense of regularity. This feeling was novel to Lu Feng. He understood that all of this was a blessing thanks to the primordial scripture. When he opened the skylight, it was as if he was standing under the starry sky, looking at the pitch-black night. Lu Feng dispelled the urge to buy more potions. The primordial scripture has such a heaven-defying effect. This is really incredible. I have a feeling that after absorbing a few more bottles of medicine, my mind power will break through to the level of a beginner psychic. As long as the primordial scripture breaks through, then the shackles of these levels will no longer cause any trouble. I didn't block it at all. Therefore, what I need to do to become a psyche master is to comprehend the primordial sutra and then continuously cultivate and absorb spiritual power. It only took him a few days to break through to the level of a beginner psychic. This was undoubtedly inconceivable in the Federation for those who had the talent to be a psychic. Even if their mental strength was saturated, it was only a barrier for them to break through to become a beginner psychic. It was impossible for them to do so without at least half a month of closed-door cultivation. Previously, Lu Feng had never cultivated as a psychic. He had spent all his time training his body. He had also worked hard on the cultivation of his mind power, but to no avail. After cultivating for so many years, he still couldn't compare to those talented people who had absorbed elixirs and cultivated for a few days. Back then, when Li Yongheng gave him the spirit-sobering medicine, it was only because he held onto a trace of hope that he could pass the test. Although the spirit-sobering medicine was a relatively high-grade medicine. However, there was a limit to how high a level 1 could reach. After all, it wasn't a true high-grade potion, and it didn't have the heaven-defying effects of high-grade potions. Anyway, the pharmacy is probably closed now. Since I have nothing to do, why don't I take a look at the Sky Network and test my mental strength and development at the same time? Mental strength was the same as a martial artist's strength. It was a unit used to measure a psychic's mental strength. The basic unit of mental strength was condensation. The standard to become a beginner psychic was to have a mental strength of 1 condensation. As for the development of mental strength, it was the true test of a psychic's talent and strength in battle. One had to know that a psychic's greatest use was to control mechas and battleships. It wasn't something that could be controlled well with sufficient mental strength. For example, some warriors had strong physiques that far exceeded that of ordinary people. However, there were some movements that ordinary warriors couldn't perform. It was because their bodies weren't flexible enough. The strength of mental strength sensitivity was directly related to the degree of flexibility in controlling mechas and battleships. If 2 psychics had the same level of mental strength, the one with a higher development of mental strength could use the bonus of mental strength to easily kill the psychic with a lower level of mental strength sensitivity. Some psychic with terrifying talent could even surpass a level and challenge a high-level psychic. What Lu Feng wanted to do now was connect to the Sky Network and check the strength of his mental strength and sensitivity. When he thought of this, he didn't hesitate and directly opened the Sky Network communication device on his wrist. The next moment, a sparkling screen of light enveloped Lu Feng. He seemed to have fallen asleep just like that. In the Sky Network, Lu Feng opened a map of the Sky Network Earth and started to look for the location of the Psychic Guild Hall. 8,000 years ago, humans had gone through 4,000 years of development in the era of space navigation. Their technological progress had finally reached a next screen. At this time, the Sky Network was born. This was a virtual world, or rather, a brand new world. It was a virtual space that was independent of the real world. In here, everything was simulated, but it was also incomparably real. In here, one could feel everything. The only difference was that there was no real death in the Sky Network. The appearance of the Sky Network made human communication more frequent. As long as one paid enough, one could go to any location in the Human Federation in a very short time. Although everything in here couldn't be brought to the real world, it could give one a kind of almost real enjoyment. Therefore, many people would spend a lot of time in the Sky Network. Lu Feng wasn't a native, so he naturally knew about the Sky Network. Because he couldn't cultivate, he often spent a lot of time in the Sky Network. Every time he entered the Sky Network and saw the unusually real things, Lu Feng felt a kind of shock from the bottom of his heart. He was shocked by the terror of technology and the greatness of humans. He let out a deep sigh and became even more determined about his future path. After all, Lu Feng knew that such great technology still couldn't bring humans to the pinnacle of the race. The ones who really helped humans were the martialists and the exceptional Divine King. They were the final foundation of humanity and the greatest existence. Without any hesitation, He walked towards the nearest teleportation location. There wasn't much difference between the Sky Network and the real world. The only difference was that there was a teleportation array in the Sky Network. Of course, the range of the teleportation array was definitely limited. Furthermore, every teleportation cost a lot of money. The currency in the Sky Network could be exchanged with the real world. The exchange rate was 1-to-1. Soon, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of the nearest teleportation array. As he watched the endless stream of people, he wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he waited patiently. After a long time, it was finally his turn. Lu Feng didn't hesitate as he walked in. However, just as he was about to activate the teleportation array and head directly to the Psychic Master Hall, he heard a discordant voice. "Io, isn't this our great young Master Lu? Why are you still loitering around here? The assessment is about to start. Shouldn't you be cultivating hard at home?" "Oh, right. Damn it, I actually forgot. Even if great young Master Lu cultivated for 100 years, it would still be impossible for him to pass the assessment. Instead of wasting time on meaningless cultivation, why don't you take advantage of the last days of high school to enjoy it?" When he heard this voice, Lu Feng didn't turn around. He just clenched his fists tightly. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Lu Feng didn't want to face him. It wasn't because he was afraid of this person. It was because he didn't want to face him. He didn't want to face the person beside him. Why? Is great young Master Lu going into business after graduation? Are you going to soar so quickly that you've forgotten about your old classmate from middle school? You're really making me sad. Finally, after taking a deep breath, Lu Feng turned around. The moment he saw the two people behind him, Lu Feng's pupils contracted slightly. As expected, he still brought her along with him. Looking at Lu Feng's complicated gaze, then looking at the girl beside him who only had a slightly complicated and indifferent expression, the owner of the voice laughed mockingly again. "Xiaoyan, it seems like great young Master Lu still has feelings for you. Such feelings are really touching. Why don't you suffer for a while and return to his side?" When she heard the man's words, the girl beside him, who was called Xiao Yin, pursed her lips slightly. The complicated expression on her face also disappeared. "Even if you really want to, I don't want to. A waste who can't cultivate, no matter how good his family is just a waste. The boyfriend I want, even if he can't become a real warrior, can't even become a beginner warrior. How can such a person protect me in the future?" Hearing Lian's words, Lu Feng took a deep breath. When he turned around, he had already guessed such a situation. When faced with such a scene, Lu Feng would choose to leave quickly. Although he was optimistic, he still didn't want to face such an uncomfortable scene. However, now that he had completed his shocking transformation, all of this was no longer a big deal. Lu Feng already understood that from the moment he woke up, everything was different. He had been reborn. Now he was a brand new Lu Feng. In the face of anything, he would not shrink back. He would bravely face everything head-on and never take a step back. Finally, like Li Yin, all the expressions on his face gradually disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a kind of perseverance and a kind of indifference. Seeing the change in Lu Feng's expression, Li Yin and the man beside him were slightly stunned. Chapter 7. Lu Feng smiled. He didn't look at the man, but stared at Li Yin quietly. After a long time, he said, "Li Yin, you must remember what you said today. You must remember." There was a kind of calmness in his words. However, it was this kind of calmness that made Li Yin and the man's faces turn ugly. They didn't expect Lu Feng to be so different today. In the past, he would stay as far away as possible. However, today, Lu Feng seemed to have gone crazy. He didn't hide or run away, but said such words. It was a bit unbelievable. Soon, the two of them recovered. Li Yan's face carried an obvious look of displeasure. "I remember. I will always remember. But so what? Can you make me regret it? You know, Lu Feng, I was the one who dumped you. I, Li Yin, have never regretted the decision I made." After saying these words, Li Yin seemed to have found a balance. She looked at Lu Feng mockingly again. However, Lu Feng didn't change this time. He was still as calm as before. He chuckled. "That's right. You're the one who dumped me. But so what? There has never been a real relationship between you and me. Although you took the initiative to pursue me, although we were together for 2 years, I have never had much feelings for you. Breaking up with you doesn't feel too heavy for me. Oh, by the way, the King District didn't help you get a special admission to the Federal University this time, right? In 3 days, let's meet at the test site. I hope that at that time, you can still be very grateful for your choice. After saying this, Lu Feng didn't look at them again. He shrugged his shoulders gently, turned around, and walked into the transmission array. As it opened in an instant, his figure finally disappeared completely from the eyes of the two who were still in a daze. Bastard, you are a piece of trash. I was blind to have fallen in love with you. Who do you think you are to make me regret? Dream on. Li Yan's face was extremely ugly as he shouted at the empty teleportation array. It was a pity that Lu Feng could no longer hear or see all of this. A moment later, Lu Feng walked out of the transmission array. Now, he had arrived at his destination. At this time, Lu Feng's face was no longer the same as before. At this moment, there was a faint sadness in his eyes. Of course, this sadness only lasted for a moment, and it wasn't heavy at all. In the next moment, Lu Feng returned to his previous appearance. He looked at the towering building in the distance and quickly walked towards it. In fact, Lu Feng really didn't care about his relationship with Li Yan. As said before, Lu Feng and Li Yan were together because Li Yan took the initiative to pursue him. Although he didn't have any talent for cultivation, Lu Feng was still a well-deserved rich kid. Therefore, Lu Feng could be regarded as an influential figure in their school. It was a pity that Lu Feng couldn't cultivate. No matter how hard he worked, the results he achieved were always minimal. However, this was nothing. After all, among ordinary people, there might not be 1 in 100 people who could cultivate to become a warrior. And to be able to become a psychic, there might not be 1 in 100 people. When he first entered the school, Lu Feng was already an influential figure in the school. Although he was young, he had already shown some handsome appearance, so he still attracted the admiration of many girls. And Li Yan was one of them. After learning about Lu Feng's family, Li Yan began to pursue him crazily. Because of Li Yan's excellent conditions, in the end, the young and curious Lu Feng accepted Li Yan. The two got along with each other for 2 years. However, in these 2 years, Lu Feng always felt very indifferent towards Li Yan. In his heart, Li Yan was just a little better than those strangers. It could have gone on like this, or after graduation. Lu Feng would have brought Li Yan home and brought her to his parents. In the future, it might have gone on like this. However, just after they got along for 2 years, a person appeared. He was Li Yan's current boyfriend, named Wang Chu. Wang Chu and Lu Feng were both influential figures in the school. However, unlike Lu Feng, Wang Chu's family didn't have much money. Because he had power, Wang Chu's father was the deputy mayor of this city. In this city, he was of the same rank as Li Yongheng's father. Legend had it that his grandfather was a high-ranking official in the imperial capital. His uncle was also a high-ranking official in the imperial military system. His aunt was also in the imperial capital. Although she was not considered a big deal in the imperial capital, she was already unreachable to the residents of ordinary galaxies. His family could be said to be a powerful family, and he was better than Lu Fenglai. Although he didn't have much talent, Wang Chu still had the potential to become a warrior by relying on the strengthening gene medicine at home. It was just that it was difficult to determine the time. For some reason, Wang Chu and Lu Feng didn't seem to get along at all. Wang Chu always tried his best to attack Lu Feng, and Li Yan was one of them. There was no doubt that under Wang Chu's enthusiastic pursuit, Li Yan had a change of heart, or it could be said that she couldn't resist the temptation and left Lu Feng. After all, except for his appearance, Wang Chu was slightly better than Lu Feng in all other aspects. Li Yan didn't have much affection for Lu Feng. She got close to Lu Feng only because of Lu Feng's family affairs. Now that there was a better choice, she naturally kicked Lu Feng away. This was very melodramatic, but it really happened. Although he didn't really like Li Yan, he had developed some feelings for her over the past 2 years. Naturally, Lu Feng felt very uncomfortable after being betrayed like this. Of course, he only felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. After all, the two of them hadn't reached the point where they would die together. He shook his head gently and threw the heaviness from before out of his mind. Lu Feng understood that he was no longer the useless Lu Feng of the past. He would become a brand new him. The first step of this future would start with the Psychic Master Hall in front of him. Lu Feng walked faster and faster. He finally arrived in front of the tall building. Building a building in the Sky Network also required a lot of resources. However, compared to reality, this kind of expenditure was still much smaller. The Psychic Master Hall in front of him towered into the clouds. It was almost 100 stories high, and each story was at least 30 meters high. If such a building was built in the real world, the cost would be astronomical. But here it was just like this. Of course, such a huge building was not common on this planet in the Sky Network. After all, although the expenditure in the Sky Network was relatively small, there was always an expenditure. On this planet in the Sky Network, only the Psychic Master Hall, the Warrior Hall, the Federation government, and the three big schools had such a terrifying building. The other groups and organizations were slightly inferior. When he reached the entrance, Lu Feng walked in without hesitation. To be honest, this was the first time Lu Feng had entered the Psychic Master Hall. In the past, although he was optimistic, because he could not cultivate, there was always a sense of inferiority in his heart. It was also because of this that Lu Feng had never entered the Psychic Master Hall or the Warrior Hall in the Sky Network. This was Lu Feng's first time. He had just walked in and hadn't adjusted to the scene before him when a crisp voice rang in Lu Feng's ears. "Sir, may I know what service you require?" Lu Feng looked at the young lady beside him and was slightly stunned. He felt his heart beating violently. However, this feeling was quickly suppressed. He coughed lightly to cover up his previous loss of self-control. Lu Feng looked at the young lady in front of him and sized her up. He had to admit that this was a beautiful young lady. She was filled with the aura of sunshine. Compared to Lien, the young lady in front of him was much, much more beautiful. Although she was dressed as a waitress, Lu Feng could still feel a noble and otherworldly aura from her. Everything was so indescribable. "I wanted to ask, where can I test my spiritual strength?" In order to prevent the other party from thinking of him as a pervert, Lu Feng hurriedly explained his intentions. Hearing this, the young lady revealed a sweet professional smile. She stretched out her fair arm and tapped lightly in the air. Immediately, a sparkling and translucent light spot appeared where her finger had landed. This is the map of the Psychic Master Hall stored in it. You can use it to check. The young lady took the light spot and brought it to Lu Feng. Lu Feng didn't hesitate. He hurriedly opened the recording tool that he carried with him and received the map of the Psychic Master Hall. "Sir, is there anything else you need help with?" After receiving the map, the young lady's sweet voice sounded again. Lu Feng hurriedly shook his head and said, "No more." The young lady smiled and nodded. Then, she turned around and left, walking towards another person who had just entered. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng smiled slightly and didn't continue to pay attention to the young lady. He opened a recording tool that he carried with him and began to look at the map. The moment he opened it, a three-dimensional map of the entire Psychic Master Hall appeared. After looking at it for a while, Lu Feng finally found the location where the spiritual strength test was located. He didn't waste any time and directly walked there. Seeing Lu Feng's figure disappear, the young girl who had finished serving a middle-aged woman glanced around. She had a slightly puzzled expression on her face. But soon, the puzzlement on her face disappeared because there was someone else who needed her help again. Chapter 8. Following the instructions on the map, Lu Feng walked straight to the 97th floor. This floor was where the psychic test was conducted. The entire floor was filled with psychic tests. Before entering, Lu Feng felt that it was a little extravagant and wasteful to use the entire 97th floor as a place to test one's psychic power. After all, the size of the psychic hall was really terrifying. It was at least 3,000 meters long and at least 2,000 meters wide. It was a little wasteful to use almost 6 square kilometers of space as a testing ground. However, when he actually came up, Lu Feng realized that there was a reason for the psychic hall to do this. As far as the eye could see, there were many people moving about. The number of people here was several times more than the hall below. Lu Feng estimated that there were at least 100,000 people here. This scene made Lu Feng slightly shocked. However, he quickly understood. Actually, it was normal for there to be so many people here. After all, this was the Sky Network, and the Psychic Hall in the Sky Network gathered all the psychics on the planet. The population on this planet was close to 1 billion. According to the ratio of 100 warriors to 1, there were close to 10 million warriors. The ratio of warriors to psychics was 1,000 to 1, which meant that there were tens of thousands of psychics on this planet. Even if only half of the tens of thousands of psychics entered the Sky Network, there would still be 5,000 of them. Psychics were different from the ordinary people who came to visit the Psychic Hall. They came either to cultivate or to test their psychic power. In addition to the ordinary people who came here to test their psychic power, it was not impossible for there to be 100,000 people on the 97th floor. There were all kinds of testing instruments on this floor. They were instruments specially used to test one's psychic power. The highest limit was 1,000 units. Unless there was someone who surpassed the peak of a high-level psychic, it could completely test one's psychic power. Lu Feng sighed softly as he looked at the crowd in front of each instrument. He did not hesitate. He walked to the instrument with the fewest people and quietly queued up. Time passed by slowly. After waiting for almost 2 hours, it was finally Lu Feng's turn. It was already 12 o'clock. At this time, many people had already left the Sky Network to rest. However, Lu Feng didn't feel that way because he didn't have to go to class for the next 3 days. In addition to the complete transformation today, he didn't feel sleepy at all. Therefore, Lu Feng waited quietly. Finally, when it was almost 1 p.m., it was Lu Feng's turn. At this time, the number of people in the hall was less than 1/10 of the number when they first entered. After taking a deep breath, Lu Feng didn't hesitate anymore. He walked directly in front of the instrument and entered the test according to the steps in his memory. After putting on the helmet, Lu Feng felt a vague feeling coming over him. However, this feeling did not last long. With a ding sound, Lu Feng knew that the test was over. He took off his helmet and calmed himself down. Finally, he looked at the instrument's display. In an instant, Lu Feng's pupils shrank slightly. In the next moment, the corners of his mouth twisted slightly. It wasn't because he was frightened, but rather because he was smiling excitedly. At this moment, Lu Feng really wanted to laugh. He really wanted to laugh out loud. He also really wanted to cry. He really wanted to cry out loud. He had done it. He had really done it. The terrifying effects of the Origin Sutra shocked Lu Feng and made him feel excited. He understood that he was no longer the ordinary Lu Feng who had been called a piece of trash in the past. Not only had he changed his own aptitude, but Lu Feng also knew that, regardless of whether he was a beginner warrior or a psychic, he was no longer at his limit. With the great demon true body and the Origin Sutra, his future would be unimaginable. After taking one last look at the blinking 0.98 foot on the screen, Lu Feng left. 0.98 condensation. He only needed 0.02 condensation to reach 1 condensation. 1 condensation meant that he was a beginner psychic. Lu Feng believed that, in the remaining 2 days, he would definitely have no problem breaking through. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng headed straight for the 98th floor. That was where the mind development quotient was tested. In the past, Lu Feng had only known about the mind development quotient. It seemed to have some sort of bonus when a psychic battled. However, Lu Feng didn't know exactly how it was calculated. In the past, he hadn't even had the possibility of becoming a psychic. If he couldn't become a psychic, then the mind development quotient wouldn't have had any meaning to him. This time was different. He was no longer the Lu Feng of the past. Therefore, the mind development quotient was very attractive to Lu Feng Lai. He quickly arrived at the 98th floor. This place also took up an entire floor. However, unlike the 97th floor below, there were very few people on the 98th floor. In fact, there were very few people here, not only because it was already very late, but also because there were too few people willing to come here. The mind development quotient wasn't like the mind quotient. It could constantly change as one cultivated. Although it could be slightly increased through some special cultivation and taking medicine, the changes were very small. Furthermore, those kinds of medicine were almost legendary. Unless one was truly at the top of the hierarchy, they wouldn't be able to use it. Therefore, there were very few people who came here to take the test. Lu Feng looked around and realized that many of the instruments were still empty. He didn't hesitate and walked straight to the nearest instrument. Unlike the mind quotient test, Lu Feng was very unfamiliar with the mind development quotient. Before this, he had never come into contact with it. This was the first time he had seen it. Once again, he opened the recording tool that he carried with him and found the method to use it. Lu Feng nodded gently and finally put on the instrument and entered the test. It was pitch black in front of him. There was nothing except for a small, exquisite silver ball. Lu Feng didn't find this strange. He already knew the method of the test, so this time, he directly entered the test state. In fact, the method of the test was very simple. That was to attach one's mind power to the small ball. Then, when the test began, the small ball would move. As long as one could feel the trajectory of the mind power attached to the small ball, then one would pass. The system would determine whether the tester could really grasp it based on the changes in the curve of the tester's brain domain. If one succeeded, they would pass. Do you want to start the mind development quotient test? An emotionless voice resounded in the void. Lu Feng took a deep breath and answered, "Start." In an instant, the small ball began to move. The speed wasn't too fast. At least, in Lu Feng's opinion, it was very slow. Gradually, 5 minutes passed. The small ball finally stopped. Test passed. Do you want to proceed to the next round of the test? The emotionless voice sounded again. Lu Feng knew that he had passed the first round of the test. After all, the first round really didn't pose any difficulty to him. Lu Feng didn't hesitate and continued to say, "Start." It was still the small ball, but this time, its speed was obviously much faster. However, this speed was still not difficult for Lu Fenglai. Very quickly, another 5 minutes passed, and that slightly familiar voice sounded once again. Test passed. Do you want to proceed to the next round of the test? Lu Feng's answer was the same, as always. Just like that, it was a continuous test. The small ball's speed finally became faster and faster. Finally, after passing 9 times in a row, the voice sounded again. The first level of the test is complete. Do you want to proceed to the next level of the test? Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. This kind of statement wasn't in the previous prompts. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and shouted firmly, "Start." Slowly, the scene in front of him changed. This time, the change wasn't too big. It was nothing more than another small ball. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng understood a little. He divided his mental strength into 2 and attached it to the 2 small balls. And the moment he finished, the small balls began to move slowly. But this time, the speed returned to the previous speed of the first test. If it was a small ball, then this speed was really nothing for Lu Fenglai. But when the mental strength was divided into 2, this speed was a little uncomfortable. After all, the consumption of holding 2 small balls at the same time wasn't just a little bit more than 1. Soon, 5 minutes passed, and Lu Feng finally felt a little pressure at this moment. Test passed. Do you want to proceed to the next round of the test? Start. 10 times. It was another 10 times in a row. When the 19th time came, Lu Feng faintly felt that he was about to reach his limit. The 10th test was undoubtedly the fastest. And, paying attention to 2 small balls at the same time, the consumption was incomparably terrifying. Entering here, Lu Feng had already done 19 tests. 9 times 1 small ball, 10 times 2 small balls. In the void, the voice changed. It became the content of the 10th test. The second level of the test is complete. Do you want to proceed to the next level of the test? Lu Feng was slightly silent at this moment. He finally understood. The first level of the test was 1 small ball, and the second level was 2 small balls. Then, the third level was probably 3 small balls. Gritting his teeth fiercely, Lu Feng knew that he was about to reach his limit. But after all, he still had a little bit of potential. Moreover, he also wanted to see what his limit was. So, Lu Feng shouted the word "start" again. Chapter 9. Sure enough, the void changed again, and 3 small balls appeared. Lu Feng also skillfully divided his mental strength into 3 and attached it to the balls. The speed was restored to the 1st and 10th times. However, this time, Lu Feng really felt that he had reached his limit. 3 small balls were really the limit for Lu Feng. Lu Feng felt that he should give up. However, the next moment, he seemed to think of Li Yan again. He thought of the harsh content when they broke up. He thought of his parents' expectations mixed with slight disappointment. He gritted his teeth fiercely. In the end, he persisted for 5 minutes. When the 5 minutes were up, Lu Feng felt a kind of mental emptiness. In the void, the voice was still as usual. Test passed. Do you want to proceed to the next round of the test? Begin. Begin. Why not begin? For some reason, when the limit came, Lu Feng felt that he seemed to have changed. He had become a little crazy. This was completely different from his usual calm character. However, he was not unfamiliar with such a change. It seemed that madness was what he should have. In my eyes, I have never given up. Maybe I will fail, or maybe I will not be able to reach the end. However, when have I ever given up? When have I ever forgotten myself? So begin. Begin. Then continue. Continue. The 3 small balls moved separately, and the speed was the same as the 2nd and 12th times. However, Lu Feng gradually began to be unable to keep up. When the 5 minutes were up, Lu Feng felt that he had really reached his limit. However, when the voice sounded again, Kieran didn't hesitate to say the word begin. Begin, begin. Once again it began. Finally, the 3rd round of the test was passed. Passed. Continuing, Lu Feng began to challenge his limits. His madness continued, and his mental strength continued to burn. Unfortunately, even if he was crazy, he still had a limit. When the 25th round appeared, Lu Feng completely failed. He didn't fail at the end, but he failed completely at the beginning. He didn't even last a minute before the system judged him as a failure. In fact, in the 24th round, he had already reached his limit. However, with his last burst of madness, he still managed to hold on for 5 minutes. However, for the 25th round, he really had no other choice. This was not something that could be done just because he wanted to persevere because the system had already determined that he had failed. With a deep sigh, Lu Feng exited the testing space. Looking at the display in front of him, Lu Feng took a deep breath. There was a number 2 for inch on it. Spiritual Development Index 2. 4. Lu Feng had no idea what this number represented. After all, he didn't pay any attention to these things before. I'll check it out after we leave. Lu Feng decided that once he left this place, he would investigate the meaning of 2. 4. However, just as Lu Feng was about to leave, another tester walked out of the device beside him. When he saw the tester walk out, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. It wasn't because he recognized the tester. It was because he was surprised by how young the tester was. Based on his appearance alone, the tester was much younger than Lu Feng. He probably looked like he was only 13 or 14 years old. However, there was a number flashing on his display screen. 4. 2 foot. 4, 2. When he saw this number, Lu Feng was completely speechless. His expression was full of frustration. He didn't know what the standard for Spiritual Development Index was. However, after passing the test, Lu Feng understood that the higher the number, the stronger the Spiritual Development Index, and the higher the talent of the tester. This kid had actually reached 4. 2. This was 8 points higher than his own 2. 4. This meant that he had persevered for 2 whole rounds of the 4-ball test and had only failed in the 3rd round. This kind of talent was much, much better than his own. He was a little depressed. Very depressed. Although Lu Feng knew that he had undergone a complete transformation after cultivating the Origin Sutra, he still couldn't believe it. He was already satisfied with being able to cultivate. However, when he saw that any random kid had surpassed him in terms of talent, Lu Feng still felt a sense of loss. His talent was still not good enough. He turned around and walked straight to the door. At this time, Lu Feng didn't want to look up any more information about Spiritual Development Index. He had suffered enough of a setback. He didn't want to suffer another one. Anyway, with the existence of the Origin Sutra, I will definitely become a powerhouse in the future. Although my talent is not good, I will use hard work to make up for it. After thinking about it, Lu Feng dispelled the depression in his heart. It was already good enough that he could cultivate. If he insisted on anything else, it would be too greedy. Lu Feng left. The boy who had just finished the test looked at Lu Feng's display screen and looked in the direction that Lu Feng had left. His eyes flashed with a trace of light. He muttered to himself, 2, 4? Not bad. His talent development index actually reached 0. 8. He would be considered a genius even in the starry sky. No wonder he could become an intermediate psychic at such a young age. Among the ordinary people on this planet, it's really not easy to achieve this. Although he didn't use any equipment to test it, in the boy's mind, Lu Feng should be an intermediate psychic. After all, it was impossible for a beginner psychic to reach a spiritual development quotient of 2. For on such a small planet, only an intermediate psychic would have a spiritual development quotient of 2. 4. He smiled faintly. The boy didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked to a room next to him, waiting there quietly. Soon, a figure walked out of the room. If Lu Feng were here, he would definitely recognize this person. It was the girl who had made his heart beat for the first time. Seeing the girl walk out, the boy put on a sweet smile. He said, "Big sister, you are really amazing." At this moment, the girl's equipment showed a terrifying number of 6. 4. Hearing the boy's words, the girl reached out and rubbed the boy's head. She looked at the boy with a doting expression and said, "Little Chun, big sister has put in a lot of hard work and gone through countless training to reach this step. When you are of age, you will be like big sister. When you become an advanced psychic and use the precious medicine provided by the family, I'm afraid you won't be any worse than big sister." Hearing the girl's words, the boy raised his head proudly. "Of course, I am a family's genius. But until now, elder sister, haven't you also not used any potions? Although I might not be as good as big sister in the future, ordinary people definitely can't compare to me." Hearing the boy's words, the girl gently rubbed his head again. She said slowly, "But don't be too arrogant. Your talent should be at the level of a genius among the large families in the Federation. But don't forget, in the millions of planets in the Federation, there are tens of thousands of third-class families, thousands of second-class families, hundreds of first-class families, and 8 super families. No one knows how many geniuses are hidden among them. Our family is only a first-class family. We can't be considered the strongest among the first-class families. There are definitely many geniuses hidden in the families above us. Not to mention the distant ones, there is a genius in our heavenly clouds galaxy. His talent development quotient has reached 1. 7. Compared to Big Sister, he is even stronger." Hearing his sister's words, the boy curled his lips. "Big Sister, you're talking about Big Brother Zhao Qian, right? He is one of the top 3 geniuses among the many families in our heavenly clouds galaxy. Using him to attack me isn't a bit too much of a bully?" Seeing the boy's appearance, the girl smiled faintly. The beautiful moment made the few test takers passing by a little sluggish. "Your big brother Zhao Qian is a true genius. He is now an intermediate psychic grandmaster. Coupled with his terrifying spirit development quotient, even an ordinary intermediate psychic is no match for him." Hearing the girl's words, the boy was slightly stunned. Then he shouted loudly, "Big brother Zhao Qian is already a psychic grandmaster. With his high talent development quotient of 1. 7, coupled with the addition of medicine, how much has big brother Zhao Qian's spirit development quotient now?" The boy's expression was somewhat gloomy. Seeing the boy's expression, the girl smiled beautifully again. Before he became a psychic, his talent development quotient, which is the original development quotient, had already reached 1. 7. Now that he is a 4th grade psychic grandmaster, with this 4-grade increase, his spirit development quotient has reached an astonishing 6. 8. Coupled with the heaven-defying medicine he has taken, I'm afraid Zhao Qian's spirit development quotient is at least 7. 5. Hearing the girl's calculations, the boy's pupils bulged slightly. He was somewhat in disbelief. A spirit development quotient of 7. 5 and above, that is a 7. 5 times increase. coupled with their Zhao family's inherited cultivation method that has a terrifying amplification quotient. With his ability, he must have comprehended star rank power. No wonder Big Brother Zhao Qian can defeat ordinary intermediate psychic grandmasters when he is only an intermediate psychic grandmaster. The girl muttered to herself and didn't say anything. Spirit development quotient was actually divided into two aspects. One was the talent development quotient. This was something that wouldn't change. The other was the spirit development quotient. The spirit development quotient was constantly changing. Its greatest use was actually an addition to one's spirit power. The talent development quotient was a person's true talent. Every time a psychic leveled up, the talent development quotient was bestowed with a certain amount of spirit development quotient. For example, if the talent development quotient was 1, once a cultivator became a third-grade psychic grandmaster, his own level would increase by 3. The spirit development quotient given by the talent development quotient would be 1. 1 multiplied by 3, resulting in 3. 3 points, coupled with the original 1 talent development quotient. When he was a high-level psychic grandmaster, his spirit development quotient would be 4. This also meant that he could increase his ability by 4 times. Chapter 10. In addition, there were also other powerful cultivation methods with terrifying amplification abilities. For example, the cultivation method that corresponded to a level 4 telekinesis grandmaster was a star-grade cultivation method. As long as a telekinesis grandmaster completely comprehended a star-grade cultivation method, they would be able to display a star-grade combat strength and even achieve a certain degree of amplification. Of course, some peerless geniuses with terrifying comprehension abilities were able to comprehend level 5 meteor cultivation methods while they were still level 4 telekinesis grandmasters or martialists. Therefore, challenging people at a higher level would be a piece of cake for them. As long as a cultivator could comprehend a higher-level cultivation method in advance, their amplification abilities would increase by 10 times. However, this was only true for peerless geniuses who comprehended cultivation methods at a higher level. If a person comprehended a cultivation method of the same level at the same level, the amplification wouldn't be able to reach 10 times. After all, their level had already adapted to such a cultivation method, so the amplification was limited. If a high-level warrior comprehended a mid-grade cultivation method while he was still a junior warrior, then he would be able to amplify his abilities by 10 times. However, when he became an intermediate warrior, if he still practiced an intermediate cultivation method, then the degree of increase would be reduced to 5 times, or maybe even less than 5 times. Once he became a high-level warrior, the mid-grade cultivation method wouldn't amplify his abilities anymore. When Lu Feng had taken the test, he hadn't become a junior telekinesis grandmaster yet. Therefore, his 2 was actually his innate talent development index. If he were to become an intermediate psychic, then according to the ratio, his spiritual development quotient would probably reach a terrifying 7. 2. Although he was only a mid-grade telekinesis grandmaster, his spirit development index was already comparable to that genius called Zhao Qian's. Such a number was absolutely terrifying. Unfortunately, Lu Feng didn't know about this. He had been shocked by the boy's number, so he hadn't searched for information about his spirit development index. Therefore, even though he had a talent that frightened the entire Federation, he still didn't know about it. That's right. Zhao Qian is only a genius in the Sky Clouds galaxy. He isn't even considered the top genius in the entire Sky Clouds galaxy. Legend has it that there is a monster with a 9 spirit development index in the Sky Clouds Guild Hall. In the entire Federation, that would be considered a freak. Even if they didn't comprehend the next level of cultivation technique, they would still be able to challenge ordinary existences of a higher level and win. If you really want to calculate, you're 1. For development quotient isn't really the peak. So don't be too proud. Hearing the girl's words, the boy finally stopped talking. However, an inexplicable fighting spirit was ignited in his eyes. Although he was young, he had a family. Therefore, he knew that there were many freaks in the Federation. According to ancient legends, although there were a few extremely powerful Psyche Masters, they were unable to reach the ultimate realm of Psyche Masters and step into the supreme realm of the Divine King. However, due to the terrifying nature of a Psyche Master at the later stage, they were able to rival a peerless Divine King at the peak of the lower realm. Their bloodlines had naturally inherited the terrifying talent of these heretic sovereigns. Some geniuses with dense bloodlines would even have a talent actualization quotient of 2.0 or above. This was undoubtedly extremely frightening. Therefore, the boy understood that while he could be considered a genius in this part of the universe, he was nothing in the eyes of the entire Federation. By the time he exited the Sky Network, it was already past 3 in the morning. However, Lu Feng didn't feel tired at all. The changes that had happened today had caused his mind to be in a state of excitement at all times. In addition, his spiritual power was almost at the beginner Psyche Master level. Therefore, it didn't matter if he didn't sleep at this moment. However, Lu Feng was clearly used to resting every day. Not long after exiting the Sky Network, he had already collapsed on the bed and slowly fell asleep. The next day, the alarm rang on time. Looking at the clock indicating 8 o'clock, Lu Feng sat up immediately. He had slept for less than 5 hours, but Lu Feng felt unprecedentedly good. If it was a normal day, it would take more than 10 minutes just to get out of bed. However, today he woke up in an instant. Feeling the changes in the world in his eyes, Lu Feng knew that everything that had happened last night wasn't a dream. At this moment, he didn't hesitate. He ran into the living room and picked up the Federation's memory card. Then, he flew out of the house and ran towards the ZTT pharmacy. Today, Lu Feng was going to work hard and become a true beginner Psyche Master in one go. This time, the attendant wasn't the same one from yesterday. Otherwise, he would definitely be surprised to see Lu Feng come here again and buy so many medicines. However, even so, the attendant couldn't help but be surprised when Lu Feng bought more than 300,000 medicines in one go. After all, an ordinary person wouldn't be able to use such a large amount of medicine. Furthermore, Lu Feng looked like a high school student, but he could casually take out 300,000 Federation dollars. This was still very surprising to the attendant. One had to know that the ZTT pharmacy's treatment was considered very good. However, even so, his monthly salary was only a little more than 20,000. However, this young man bought 300,000 medicines in one go. This was enough to show how rich this young man's family was. After taking out all the medicines that Lu Feng needed and swiping the card, the attendant saw that Lu Feng was flying away just like when he came. Although he was very confused about why Lu Feng bought so many medicines, the attendant didn't ask anything. He just continued to bring the next customer's medicine with a trace of doubt. Buying 300,000 medicines in one go was very painful for Lu Fenglai. His family was rich. His parents were high-ranking executives in BUCC, but they didn't give him a lot of money every month. Of course, this not a lot was only based on his family's wealth. After all, Lu Feng's family was very famous in the wealthy district where he lived. Mom and dad are the same. Their monthly salary is at least a few million. They don't need much money in the company, but they only give me a few tens of thousands every month. 300,000. That was my living expenses for a whole year last year. If I didn't save up, I'm afraid that even with the primordial scripture, I could only sit there and do nothing. Looking at the less than 10,000 Federation coins left in his card, Lu Feng was slightly depressed. In the past, he always had enough money. However, now that he had the Devil True Body and the Primordial Scripture, these two supreme techniques that could be accumulated with money, Lu Feng finally felt that he was poor. No matter what, as long as I become a beginner psychic and warrior this time and get into the Federation Academy, then I can ask my parents for more money. I can be considered an adult. Thinking about it, the two of them should be very happy to give it to me. Lu Feng's parents gave Lu Feng a lot of living expenses. At least among his classmates, no one could compare to him. However, compared to Lu Feng's family, the amount was much less. Lu Feng believed that as long as his parents knew that he had become a beginner psychic, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to ask for a few million. As Lu Feng kept thinking about whether the medicine he bought for a few million would be enough to support him to break through to an intermediate psychic, he had already arrived at the door of his house. He raised his head and was about to open the door when Lu Feng froze. He didn't know when, but 3 people had appeared in front of his house. They weren't very old. Based on their appearance, they were only a few years older than Lu Feng. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng confirmed that he had never seen these 3 people before. Before he could speak, the oldest of the 3 people in front of him spoke first. "You must be Uncle Lu's child, Lu Feng." Hearing that the other party recognized him, Lu Feng tried to recall again, but he still couldn't remember who these people were. Since the other party had already recognized him, he didn't hesitate and nodded gently. "Are you looking for my father?" Listening to the tone of the 3 people, it seemed that they knew his father. Therefore, Lu Feng asked this question. The girl smiled faintly, with a kind of sweetness. To be honest, judging from the appearance of this girl, she seemed to be only a few years older than him. However, she was really beautiful. Lu Feng secretly compared her with the girls he knew, but found that among the girls he had really met, only his mother and the girl he saw in the Sky Network Psychic Guild could surpass her. The others couldn't be compared at all. Even his ex-girlfriend, Lian, was a few levels below her. The girl said, "Yes, we're looking for Uncle Lu. Isn't he at home? Logically speaking, you're about to take the college entrance examination, so he should be back by now." Hearing the girl's words, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. He didn't expect these 3 people to know so much about him. They even knew that he was about to take the college entrance examination, although he was puzzled about the other party's identity. However, Lu Feng still replied politely, "My parents seem to have some research to do recently, so they won't be coming for the time being. If you want to find him, I'm afraid you'll have to wait for a long time." Hearing this, the girl was slightly stunned and then revealed a thoughtful expression. "I see." Lu Feng heard the regret in the girl's words. However, there was nothing he could do. After all, if his parents didn't come back, he wouldn't be able to find them. Looking at the girl's appearance, it seemed that she was planning to leave. Lu Feng didn't open his mouth to invite them in. In the Federation, the degree of stability had greatly increased. However, one couldn't be less wary of others, especially Lu Feng's family, which was the kind of family that was truly rich. However, just as Lu Feng was about to go home, he suddenly heard a voice, although it was very soft. However, after several years of training, Lu Feng, who had already condensed the primitive body, could still vaguely hear it. "Is it because of this trash that Uncle Lu Tao left the family? What's so good about this trash? Is there something wrong with Uncle Lu Feng's brain? If he was still there now, then I'm afraid that by now." Chapter 11. For a moment, Lu Feng felt an impulse of hot blood in his body. His eyes were already red. He didn't hear the last few words clearly, but at the moment, Lu Feng was really angry. Lu Feng didn't know why. His memory started when he was 5 years old. According to what his parents told him, when Lu Feng was very young, he seemed to have a serious illness, although his life was saved in the end. However, Lu Feng's brain was also damaged to a certain extent, and he seemed to have forgotten the memories before the age of 5. From the age of 5, Lu Feng started a new life. However, for some reason, Lu Feng was particularly sensitive to the word trash. The reason why he didn't want to face Li Yan at the beginning was because she said the word trash. And now, this unknown person actually said the words that were the most unacceptable to him. He even casually evaluated his father, who was the most important person in his heart. Lu Feng was finally overwhelmed by anger. Turning around, looking at the young man who spoke, Lu Feng fiercely gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Do you dare to say what you just said again?" For a moment, the 3 of them were slightly stunned. They looked at Lu Feng, not understanding how Lu Feng heard it. The young man who spoke sarcastically just now completely recovered in a moment. He looked at Lu Feng, full of disdain. "So what if I say it again? You're trash. Since you were very young, you've been a complete trash. If it weren't for you, how could Uncle, who the family has spent so much effort to cultivate, leave? You've been a disgrace to the family since you were born. When you grew up a little bit, you became a burden to the family. At that time, why didn't you directly die of illness? The punch didn't have a strong force, but this punch was used by Lu Feng in anger. After years of continuous training, although Lu Feng hasn't become a primary warrior and the strength in his body may not even be half a star. However, his talent was unparalleled. Lu Feng had a terrifying talent for comprehension, and this punch had been tempered countless times. He was confident that even if he was facing a person who was about to enter the level of a primary warrior, or even someone had just stepped into the level of a primary warrior, it was still possible to knock him down. This was Lu Feng's greatest trump card. Even when he fought against Zhao Chong, he had never used it. But now, anger had made him dizzy, making Lu Feng forget everything. He actually used all his strength to launch his strongest attack. As it whizzed past, it actually caused a slight sound of wind. Looking at this scene, the three of them were slightly taken aback. They didn't expect that this trash, who didn't even have half a star of strength, would actually be able to produce an attack that surpassed 1 star. However, the strength of only 1 star was far too weak for them. Astonishment flashed in his eyes, and then it turned into thick ridicule and thick disdain. Looking at Lu Feng's incoming fist, he didn't even make a move. He only trembled slightly, and suddenly a blurry light shrouded his body. He actually directly sent Lu Feng flying to a distant place. Spitting out a mouthful of blood, Lu Feng felt the blood in his body tumble, as if a few of his bones were broken. If he hadn't successfully practiced the great devil true body in the spiritual space and successfully condensed the original body, he was afraid that this time he would have been crippled. Lu Qing, what are you doing? The face of the woman beside him changed greatly. Looking at the young man who spoke, her expression was full of anxiety and anger. But facing this, the young man called Lu Qing just shrugged his shoulders. Showing an innocent look, he glanced at Lu Feng and slowly said, "Sister Rong, I didn't do anything. He wanted to hit me, so I let him hit me. Lu Song, you saw it for yourself. From the beginning to the end, I was only defending. I didn't even make a move." Lu Song, who was beside him, also had the same expression on his face. He nodded fiercely, but his mocking eyes had already betrayed his true thoughts. When she saw this, a trace of helplessness flashed in Lu Rong's eyes. She looked at the two of them a little angrily. "He is just an ordinary person. You did this on purpose, didn't you?" No matter what, the blood flowing in his body is still the blood of the Lu family. He is still a member of the Lu family. He is your cousin. After a pause, as if she had thought of something, Lu Rong opened her mouth again and said, "When Uncle Lu comes looking for you, let's see how you explain it." The last sentence was what she really thought. When they heard the two words, Lu Tao, their expressions changed slightly. They had grown up listening to the legends of Lu Tao. And because of this good-for-nothing, this legendary uncle had even left the family. It was obvious how important Lu Feng was in Lu Tao's heart. Now, he had used such a method to hurt Lu Feng. Once Lu Tao found out, he might really be furious. And on this trip, they also had something that they needed Lu Tao's help with. If Lu Tao hated them because of this, they might not have a good ending even if they returned to the family. Although this was the case, Lu Qing still forced himself to hold on. After all, with his status, he couldn't be punished so easily. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Lu Qing said, "Even if Uncle Lu Tao finds out, what can he do? I was already beaten up by him. If he still got hurt, he can only say that he is a good-for-nothing. Even if Uncle Lu wants to find me, he won't be able to." When she heard Lu Qing's words, a trace of mockery flashed in Lu Rong's eyes. "Yes, you defended yourself. But why did you activate your protective energy? Are you an idiot too? Have you forgotten the use of your protective energy?" Lu Qing finally stopped talking. He only looked at Lu Feng with a look of disdain. And this look deeply stabbed Lu Feng. Lu Feng forced himself to stand up. Looking at the three people in front of him, he stretched out his arm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Seeing that Lu Feng could still stand up, the three of them were slightly stunned. Just now, Lu Rong had planned to inform the hospital to come and treat him. In her opinion, after being hit by Lu Qing's protective energy, Lu Feng, who wasn't even half a star, should at least be seriously injured. It wasn't impossible for him to be temporarily disabled, but he actually stood up just like that. Lu Feng took a deep breath. His eyes were filled with coldness. When he opened his mouth, his words were filled with endless coldness. "Don't worry, I won't tell my father about what happened today. I will take back everything that you have given me. I hope that one day you will still have the courage to tell me that you are a piece of trash." Lu Feng turned around and opened the villa's space steel door with difficulty. Dragging his seriously injured body, he finally walked in. "Lu Feng, wait a minute. I have the family's high-grade medicine here." Lu Rong caught up with Lu Feng in a few steps. She took out a bottle of crystal-clear medicine from somewhere and wanted to hand it to Lu Feng, but what she got was the cold steel door. "What is this? If it weren't for his good father, he would still be a piece of trash, even if there were 10,000 of him." "All right, Lu Qing, don't say anything else. If this mission fails, you will have to take full responsibility. He is clearly a piece of trash. He has been this way since he was young. Am I wrong?" Lu Feng leaned against the steel door tightly. A few drops of blood dripped from his fingertips, but he didn't feel it. At this moment, his heart was filled with anger. "A piece of trash? Then, one day, this piece of trash, will trample all of you under my feet. I will let you see who is the real piece of trash." Dragging his broken body, Lu Feng finally returned to the hall. At this moment, his consciousness had begun to blur. He smiled helplessly. Although he had condensed the primitive body, he had not become a beginner warrior after all. Lu Feng knew about the existence that could release protective energy. That was something that only warriors could do. A venerated martialist was at least 1,000 stars. Their strength alone was a few thousand times greater than his own. It was already very good that he could not die or be crippled under the counterattack. Gradually, his eyes began to blur. Lu Feng felt a wave of fatigue hit him, but he didn't close his eyes, because he knew that once he closed his eyes, he might not be able to wake up again. He still had many wishes that had not been fulfilled. He still had many things that he had not proven. He could not fall like this. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted to prove his existence to the whole world, the whole Federation, and the whole human race. How could he just lie down like this and leave like this? In a trance, Lu Feng thought of many things. An inexplicable brilliance appeared in his once cynical eyes. It was a kind of perseverance, unyielding, and fearless expression. At the next moment, when Lu Feng could no longer hold on, an ancient scripture suddenly appeared in his mind. It was obviously obscure and difficult to understand, but in Lu Feng's mind, it was incomparably clear. In a trance, he seemed to see the ancient scene again. The great giant who stood in the endless chaos and accepted the baptism of the world's calamity. He roared at the heavens, he lifted the world, he shattered the dusk. He was invincible in the starry sky. This was an invincible spirit, even in the face of the great calamity of the world, even in the face of endless disasters. But standing under the starry sky, in order to pursue the peak, in order to reach the strongest realm, he still had to step on endless tempering, shatter the endless shackles, and move forward bravely without fear. His body, which was originally lying on the ground, unconsciously sat up. His hands unconsciously made many mysterious and obscure gestures. At this moment, countless lights seemed to appear in the entire living room. They flickered and rushed into Lu Feng's body. In this way, Lu Feng fell into a state of spiritual emptiness. Chapter 12. Finally, I broke through. Lu Feng woke up and felt the surging power in his body. However, he didn't feel much excitement. Lu Feng knew that this level was not enough. It was far from enough. If it was in the past, Lu Feng would be very excited. After all, his dream had finally come true. He finally took that step and became a real warrior. Although he was only a beginner, he had already realized his dream. However, at this moment, he couldn't feel happy at all after being humiliated by his so-called family brothers. Because Lu Feng knew that even though he was now a primary warrior compared to the people in the so-called family, he was still too far behind to be able to emit protective energy. They were at least warriors. A warrior, not to mention other abilities, just the strength of their physical body was enough to reach more than 1,000 stars. However, he was at most a little more than a star now. Now, they were thousands or even tens of thousands of times stronger than him. Therefore, Lu Feng couldn't feel excited. However, he wasn't depressed. There was a flickering light in his eyes. He knew that although he couldn't compare to them now, it might not be the case in the future. Looking at his physical body that had already reached the small success realm, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness. That was his peerless sharpness. One day, I will stand at the peak and look down on all of you. That day won't be too far away. I didn't expect that I would use this opportunity to break through. I'm afraid that even they didn't expect that their humiliation would become the opportunity and motivation for my breakthrough. The practice of Great Devil True Body was to use the power of nature to temper the body in all kinds of harsh environments and use all kinds of tribulations to strengthen the inside. Only in this way could one really break through quickly. This time, the serious injury directly triggered the extreme environment. He had condensed the primitive body and wanted to become a beginner warrior very quickly. Therefore, it was reasonable for him to be able to break through smoothly. Stretching out his arms, Lu Feng looked at his fist that hadn't changed at all. A trace of light flashed in his eyes again. He got off the sofa and went to his room. He opened the bedside cabinet and took out a small instrument. Lu Feng skillfully placed the instrument on his body. Following a ding sound, he fell silent for a moment and then looked at the image on the device. At this moment, Lu Feng's lips finally curled into a smile. 101 stars. Sure enough, he has already broken through and become a primary warrior. After breaking through the 1-star standard, one would be a beginner warrior. Once he broke through the 10-star standard, he could become an intermediate warrior. Lu Feng flipped the device over and looked at the position filled with fist marks. Lu Feng took a deep breath and suddenly punched at that position. He used all his strength to hit the place where the countless fist marks were most concentrated. In the next moment, a voice slowly rang out. Attack power, 4 stars, 4 stars, 4 stars. Was it a 4-star? It was actually a 4-star. At this moment, Lu Feng was sluggish. Then he went crazy. He shouted loudly with a crazed expression. After maintaining this crazy attitude for a long time, Lu Feng finally calmed down. But this time, the ecstasy on his face didn't calm down. 4 stars. His physical strength was only 1 star, but his attack had reached 4 stars. In other words, his attack just now actually hit 4 times the attack power. Lu Feng had never heard of such an increase. He had never heard of it. The corners of his mouth never closed. Lu Feng looked at the 4-star number on the device and found it hard to calm his excitement. 4 stars, my punch just now, I didn't use any martial arts at all. It was such an ordinary punch, but it reached the 4-star standard. This is equivalent to a 4 times increase. It's really terrifying. If I add the increase in my attack methods that I've learned over the years, then my full strength attack would at least have an increase of more than 10 times. Doesn't this mean that even if it's just the current me, with a punch, I can actually defeat those who have just stepped into the early intermediate stage without any martial arts? After all these years of continuous observation and comprehension, Lu Feng had gradually formed his own martial arts path. However, the level of the martial arts that he condensed couldn't even be considered as a low-level martial arts. But even so, it was already terrifying enough. Lu Feng could feel that the moves and martial arts that he created could at least double or even triple the increase. A person without any talent, who had never even learned anything, was able to create an exclusive cultivation method just by looking at it. Although it might not even be considered a low-level cultivation method, it was still extremely shocking in the Alliance. If I can get 1 or 2 real mid-level martial arts and completely comprehend them, then the current me is confident that I can even contend with mid-level warriors or even defeat them. Of course, the premise is that those mid-level warriors don't practice any mid-level martial arts or low-level martial arts. Otherwise, unless I have an outburst of 100 times the combat strength, there's still no hope. With the mid-level martial arts, Lu Feng could increase his combat strength by 10 times when he was still a beginner warrior and display the combat strength of a mid-level warrior. In addition to the fourfold increase in his physical body, then the strength that he could display would directly be equivalent to a 40-fold increase in combat strength. And now his strength was 1 star, so a 40-fold increase would be a 40-fold increase of 40 stars. In general, the upper limit of a beginner warrior was 30 stars, while mid-level warrior was 31 stars to 60 stars, a high-level warrior was 61 stars to 90 stars, and a peak warrior was 91 stars to 99 stars. However, if they also practiced mid-level martial arts, then Lu Feng's advantage would be gone. Because if they practiced the same mid-level martial arts, although they certainly couldn't reach the next level with a 10-fold increase in combat strength, they could still increase a lot. It was believed that if the martial arts were heaven-defying, an increase of 8 or 9 times was still possible. But even so, it was already terrifying enough. After all, martial arts could still be found, but it was very difficult to increase one's own potential. Feeling the surging power in his body, Lu Feng's mouth hung a trace of a satisfied smile. He muttered to himself, "The current me should be considered a little expert. Thinking about it, with my comprehending a martial arts of the same level shouldn't be a problem. And at that time, with a 5-fold increase and my own 4-fold increase, it would be a 20-fold increase. Even if it's the current me, if I use my martial arts at full strength, I should be able to reach the level of 20 stars. As long as he comprehended a martial arts of the same level, he could achieve a 20-fold increase. Such a degree was very terrifying in the entire Federation. Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the digital clock hanging above. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. Soon after, there was a slight bitterness in his voice. I didn't expect that this breakthrough would actually take me more than a day. It seems that the legends about cultivators spending a few months or even a few years at a time are not false. Lu Feng was injured yesterday morning and entered the breakthrough state. And now, it was already the afternoon of the second day. The time he used was close to 35 hours. Goo-goo. Just as Lu Feng was in a daze, a muffled sound came from his stomach, making Lu Feng slightly depressed. I originally planned to cultivate to beginner-level psychic in one go, but it seems that I'll have to fill my stomach first. I really envy those martial artists. Legend has it that once you become a martial artist, you don't need any food at all unless you're in the endless starry sky. I really don't know when I'll become a martial artist. After putting away the testing equipment, Lu Feng stretched and walked directly to the kitchen. Perhaps it was because the consumption of breaking through is greater, but Lu Feng ate almost 3 times the usual amount of food this time. Looking at the little food left in the cold box, he let out a long sigh. I'd better wait until I break through to beginner-level psychic to buy some more. After all, there's still a little more than a day until the Federal University's enrollment. If I enter the Federal University as a psychic, I think the treatment won't be bad. Lu Feng knew that in the Federation, the status of a psychic was much higher than that of a warrior. And if he wanted to continue cultivating the Primordial Sutra and the Devil True Body quickly in the future, then money was indispensable. Perhaps his family was rich, and it was safe to say that his family's assets were over 100 million. However, this kind of money would only help him when he was at a low level. Once he became an advanced psychic or a warrior, he would need to spend tens of millions. By then, it would be impractical to rely on his parents. Therefore, he could only work hard to earn the money he needed. And becoming a psychic was the most convenient and the best way. Once he became a psychic, he would receive a monthly allowance from the Federation. The monthly allowance for beginner-level psychics was 100,000. As for intermediate-level psychics, it reached a terrifying 800,000. For advanced-level psychics, as long as they joined the Psychic Hall, their monthly income would be no less than 5 million. This was undoubtedly an extreme figure. It was almost the same as the income of Lu Feng's parents. And if he could become a psychic grandmaster and choose to join the army or some large financial group, he wouldn't have to worry about money, because as long as he needed it, they would provide it. It was also because of these reasons that Lu Feng decided to enter the Federal University as a psychic. After cleaning up the leftovers on the table, Lu Feng left the dining room and walked towards his room. This time, he would work hard and swear to become a beginner-level psychic before the assessment. Chapter 13. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed once again. Following the voice prompt from outside the door, Lu Feng, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, finally opened his eyes. At this moment, a strange light flashed in Lu Feng's eyes, and 2 clouds of fog faintly appeared in his eyes. However, this situation disappeared in an instant. Lu Feng, your friend Li Yongheng is outside the door. Lu Feng, your friend Li Yongheng is outside the door. Listening to the voice prompt continuously ringing, Lu Feng finally got out of bed, turned off the voice prompt, and walked towards the door. After a few seconds, Lu Feng actually directly passed through this huge villa. If Li Yongheng saw this, he would definitely be extremely shocked, because ordinary people simply wouldn't be able to do what he wanted to do. This was a speed that only warriors at the very least could possess. However, when he separated from Lu Feng a few days ago, his physical strength hadn't even reached half a star. Opening the door and seeing Li Yongheng's worried face, Lu Feng smiled. This was a smile that came from the bottom of his heart. These days, he also thought about the so-called people from the clan who came a few days ago. However, he still couldn't figure it out, so Lu Feng didn't think about it anymore. In his heart, those so-called clansmen were far inferior to this good brother who had grown up with him. Even Li Yongheng's father, Li Haiping, was far more important in Lu Feng's heart than those so-called clansmen. Lu Feng knew that the worry on Li Yongheng's face was all because of him. Unlike Lu Feng, Li Yongheng was a true genius, and his cultivation achievements as a warrior were absolutely exceptional. The current Li Yongheng had already become a peak elementary warrior. He could become a true mid-level warrior at any time, and this seemed to be the reason why he was deliberately suppressing it. Therefore, Li Yongheng could easily pass the test, even without considering his father. Lu Feng, how's your cultivation these days? You have to succeed. Otherwise, we won't be able to keep our promise. The moment they met, he spoke in an anxious tone. These days, Li Yongheng was not very peaceful at home. Adding up all the aspects, he could not help but ask the moment he saw Lu Feng. Lu Feng smiled confidently when he heard the worried and anxious tone in his voice. The current him was no longer the same. He had undergone a complete transformation. He was no longer the trash Lu Feng of the past, who would be able to go from a piece of trash with almost no spiritual power and less than half a star of physical strength to a beginner psychic and warrior at the same time in just 3 days. This was a miracle. In the entire Federation, Lu Feng was probably one of a kind. Looking at Lu Feng's confident expression, Li Yongheng was slightly taken aback. However, his nervous mood finally eased a little. He asked with a trace of doubt and a hint of joking, Lu Feng, don't tell me you've already become a beginner psychic? Let me tell you, don't waste that bottle of spirit-sobering elixir. You don't know how many beatings I took when I got home. If I hadn't said in the end that I was giving it to you, I'm afraid my old man would have sent me straight to the military court. Lu Feng did not have much doubt about these words. Li Yongheng's father, Li Haiping, was a true warrior. He was upright and selfless, and business was business. He would never bend the law for personal gain. As a result, although Li Yongheng's identity and background were more prominent than Lu Feng's, he only became an influential figure in the school because of his outstanding talent. Lu Feng patted Li Yongheng lightly and said, "The assessment is about to begin. You'll know then. I'm afraid you won't believe anything I say now. We'll see when the time comes." Looking at Lu Feng's confident expression, Li Yongheng's last trace of doubt was completely put to rest. The two of them walked in the direction of the school. Soon, They arrived at the school and walked straight to the auditorium. That was where the graduation ceremony would be held. Along the way, there were people constantly greeting Lu Feng. Although Lu Feng could not cultivate, there were many people like him. Lu Feng's reputation in the school had always been good. So many people were happy to greet this influential figure when they saw Lu Feng. However, most of them were girls. Lu Feng, you're still popular. You see, as long as you appear, which girl won't secretly glance at you? I really don't know what Li Yin is thinking. She actually broke up with you for that trash in the King's district. The last word was not said. Li Yongheng's face showed an awkward look. He also knew about Lu Feng's feelings for Li Yin, but the two of them had been together for 2 years after all. And in the end, it was Li Yin who broke up with Lu Feng. And this was also Lu Feng's scar. Now that it was mentioned, it was a bit embarrassing. However, for Li Yongheng's awkwardness, Lu Feng just shrugged slightly. His expression was very indifferent. It was not the kind of pretense, but a real indifference. It's okay. Isn't it just a breakup? It's not a big deal. It's not like I, Lu Feng, have to marry someone else. For her, I haven't reached the point where she's unforgettable. While saying this, a figure suddenly appeared in Lu Feng's mind, but the figure was very blurry and could not be seen clearly. Vaguely, Lu Feng seemed to feel that the figure had a very important place in his heart, but he could not remember if he really knew such a person. Gently shaking his head, he expelled the figure from his mind. Lu Feng returned to his previous appearance and continued to walk to the auditorium with Li Yongheng. Oh, isn't this young Master Lu? What are you doing here? You're just attending a ceremony and you're leaving. The moment he heard this voice, Lu Feng's mood did not fluctuate much, but Li Yongheng's mood became gloomy. He turned to look in the direction of the voice and said with a trace of anger, "Zhao Chong, don't make sarcastic remarks here. You can only bully those ordinary people. If you have the ability, do you dare to have a bet with me? The bet is Lu Feng's specially recruited spot. I can let you have 10 seconds. How about it? Do you dare?" The person who came was Zhao Chong, who won the specially recruited spot from Lu Feng 3 days ago. In the Federation, once a contract was made, it would be protected by the Federation's laws. No one could change this. Hearing Li Yongheng's words, Zhao Chong's expression changed slightly. Although he had become a primary warrior, there was still a big gap between him and Li Yongheng, who was at the peak of primary warriors. Moreover, Li Yongheng was someone who had truly cultivated a cultivation method. Although his comprehension was average and he had not cultivated the cultivation method to the primary level, with his own talent, it was still possible to increase his strength by several times. Once the two of them fought, he would be instantly destroyed by Li Yongheng. After a moment, he hid his ugly expression. Zhao Chong looked at Lu Feng and said, "I'm not that stupid to participate in a battle that I know I'll lose. But to be honest, I still have to thank you, Lu Feng. Although I can enter the Federal University. But this specially recruited spot is really hard to come by. This time, thank you very much." Until he finished speaking, Zhao Chong did not look at Li Yongheng again. He turned around and walked toward the auditorium. And Li Yongheng only looked at him with a gloomy expression and was silent. The specially recruited spot allowed one to enter the Federal University without any tests. And among them, the treatment of the specially recruited students was obviously higher than that of the ordinary people. Zhao Chong, who entered the Federal University as a specially recruited student, with the help of those resources, he might really have the hope to go further. Looking at Li Yongheng's ugly expression, Lu Feng smiled. He reached out his hand and patted his best friend. "Yongheng, don't worry too much. It's just a specially recruited spot. It's not a big deal." Hearing Lu Feng's words, although Li Yongheng was still a bit gloomy, in the end, he did not dwell on this topic. He looked at Lu Feng and sighed deeply. "This time, I'm also a specially recruited spot. Originally, after entering the Federal University, I could ask my mother to think of a way to arrange for us to be together. But now, it seems like there's no hope." Li Yongheng's mother was also not simple. She belonged to the upper echelons of the government. Although her position was not as high as Li Haiping's. But in daily life, his mother's role was obviously more obvious. Lu Feng did not say anything. He still smiled slightly. He looked at the place where Zhao Chong left, and a trace of light flashed in his eyes. It was a kind of disdainful and cold smile. Specially recruited? Then what is this? The status of a specially recruited student was high, but no matter how high it was, could it be compared to a psychic? In the entire Federal University's Cymbidium branch, there were 400,000 students. There were 100,000 students in each grade, and among these 100,000 students, there were at least 1,000 specially recruited students. But there were less than 50 psychics among them. Between them, was there even a comparison? Li Yongheng was currently cursing Zhao Chong fiercely and did not hear Lu Feng's mutterings. Seeing that Lu Feng had already left, he also walked over. Soon, the two of them walked into the auditorium. At this time, the auditorium was already filled with people, including the teachers and some specially invited parents. The number of people was at least 30,000. This number was very scary, but in this huge auditorium, it did not seem crowded at all. Their school's auditorium was a square, three-dimensional building. Its length and width were almost 1,000 meters. And this auditorium, other than holding graduation ceremonies, did have other uses. Its biggest use was for competition. The sparring between the warriors was carried out here. And the upcoming Federal University's special assessment would also be held here. Chapter 14. Soon, all the students who were about to graduate had arrived. At this time, the principal of Lu Feng's school walked to the podium in the center of the auditorium. After glancing at the unusually quiet students, the principal finally began to give his graduation remarks. Lu Feng quietly listened, but Li Yongheng beside him was not as calm. At this moment, he took out the Sky Network connector and had already quietly entered the Sky Network to swim freely. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng did not wake him up. After all, Li Yongheng was the least interested in these things. After a speech that lasted for half an hour, under the applause of countless students, the principal announced the last thing. Next up is the Federal University's Special Inspection Team. If anyone wants to enter the Federal University, you can now take the test according to the order. In many people's hearts, the Federal University was no doubt a sacred place. The number of students who took the college entrance exam in the Federation every year was uncountable. Just above the Cymbidium, there were close to 8 million students. And looking at the entire Federation, it was definitely countless times more terrifying. But among these people, there were very few who could enter the Federal University. Among the 8 million Cymbidium students, there was probably less than 1% who could pass the normal exam and enter the Federal University. And if one wanted to enter the Federal University, it was not enough to just study well. After all, technology was so advanced now, it was very easy to use special methods to control general knowledge. And what the Federal University valued was not this. Only if one had a strong talent in one area, or if one had a strong talent for cultivation, would they be valued by the Federal University and be selected to enter. Of course, other than this, there was another type of person who could enter without taking the test. This type of person was the special enrollment. The special enrollment wasn't something that could be obtained easily. At the very least, without any special talent, it was extremely difficult to pass the special enrollment. However, other than this, some people could also obtain a special enrollment because of their background. For example, Lu Feng was such a person. Lu Feng's parents were high-ranking people in the BUCC, and they were also high-ranking members in the headquarters. Although they were not considered important in the headquarters, on a small planet like the Cymbidium, they were an incredible existence. And because of this reason, the school was willing to give Lu Feng a special enrollment spot. However, they didn't expect that Lu Feng would casually give away this hard-earned special recruitment quota 3 days before the assessment. In the Federation, contracts were very protected. To sign a contract signed by the president of the Federation had to follow the rules. Of course, this was what the government said. As for whether it was true or not, no one knew. But on the surface, everything still had to be followed. Since Lu Feng had signed a contract with Zhao Chong, he should be protected by the law. So, he lost the special enrollment spot. No matter what, he could not get it back. If it was the Lu Feng of the past, then he would have been completely cut off from the Federal University, the university that countless students dreamed of. But now it was different. He was no longer the trash Lu Feng of the past. Many people had begun to gather around the testers. Lu Feng was still sitting firmly in the same place, not moving at all, and Li Yongheng had already logged out of the Sky Network. He looked at the calm Lu Feng and finally showed a trace of confusion. Although Lu Feng's cultivation talent was not that good, Li Yongheng knew that Lu Feng was a genius. After all, to be able to create a cultivation method before becoming a beginner warrior, such a person was definitely a genius. And Lu Feng had always been very reliable. Since he said that he was confident, then this time he probably had absolute confidence. But at this time, why hadn't he left yet? Finally, Li Yongheng couldn't help but ask, Lu Feng, they have already started the test. Why don't you go? It's easier to be at the front of the test. The early stages of the test were usually easier to pass. After all, there was no comparison at the beginning. So, it was usually easier to pass than the final test. But Lu Feng didn't care about all this. He was now a psychic, a beginner psychic. This was enough. The status of a psychic, even if it was only a beginner psychic, did not need to be mentioned. So, even if they had already recruited all the students, as long as Lu Feng showed his identity, then the Federal University would definitely not reject him. After all, in the entire Cymbidium, there were very, very few people who could become psychic. Seeing that Lu Feng was still calm, Li Yongheng finally let out a deep breath. He knew that as long as Lu Feng wasn't provoked to a certain extent, then he would still be very calm. It seemed like everything was under Lu Feng's control. Io, why aren't you going, young Master Lu? I still remember what you said a few days ago. Li Yongheng didn't say anything, but that didn't mean that others were the same. At least, Wang Hu was an exception. The grudge between him and Lu Feng could be traced back to many years ago, when they were still in junior high. Ever since then, Wang Hu had never given up on suppressing Lu Feng as long as there was a chance. Previously, Lu Feng's special recruitment quota had been taken away by him. Otherwise, Zhao Chong wouldn't have dared to provoke Lu Feng. The words that Wang Hu had said a few days ago were what Lu Feng had said to Li Yin on the Sky Network. Now that Wang Hu had brought it up again on such an occasion, it was obvious that he wanted to embarrass Lu Feng and make him look bad. However, when he heard this, Lu Feng only tilted his head slightly and revealed an inexplicable smile. After that, he didn't say anything else. That smile. Wang Hu was stunned for a moment, and then his expression turned even uglier. The people around them could understand what that look meant. That was disregard, complete disregard. I like to see how you're going to make me regret it. Obviously, he had taken Lu Feng's words to Li Yin that day as a provocation. Lu Feng was silent. He was still as silent as ever. In the area that had become the testing venue, more than half of the test had already been carried out. Among them, a few people had already become beginner warriors. Naturally, they were directly recruited into the Federal University. This was no surprise. In addition to these people, there were also some people with the cultivation talent of psychic masters who were also selected. However, none of them were true beginner psychic masters. The Federal University could only recruit 50 psychic masters each year at most. Among these 50, more than half of them had been discovered and trained in advance. In addition, a large portion of them had already revealed their talent to become beginner psychic masters and had been specially recruited early on. Therefore, it was almost impossible to recruit a true beginner psychic master in such a recruitment. In a year, among the millions of candidates in the entire Cymbidium, the number of beginner psychic masters who could emerge was probably less than 2 digits. Not all of these beginner psychic masters would necessarily enter the Federal University. After all, in the entire Federation, besides the Federal University, there were 2 other universities that were also prominent. However, due to some special reasons, they obviously weren't very interested in ordinary people. However, psychic masters were clearly no longer in the scope of ordinary people. Finally, after waiting for nearly 2 hours, the test came to an end. At this time, there were only a few students left in the testing field. Around them were many students who had failed and hadn't left. They also wanted to see which students from their own schools could enter the federal university. At this time, Li Yongheng finally stood up. This was because beside him, Lu Feng had already stood up slowly. At this moment, Wang Chu's gaze focused on him. Zhao Chang's gaze focused on him. Many people who were happy to see Lu Feng's failure also looked over. Among the girls, Li Yin looked over. Many girls did the same. Just now, Wang Chu had already helped Lu Feng advertise. Many people knew that this was Lu Feng's last chance. He hadn't given up on his dream of entering the federal university. At this last moment, he wanted to rely on his own strength to enter the university. However, the majority of them had the look of wanting to watch a good show. They all knew about Lu Feng. He was an influential figure who had been trying to become a junior warrior since middle school. Until recently, his physical strength hadn't even reached half a star. With this kind of result, it was absolutely impossible for him to enter the federal university. Lu Feng didn't care about the surrounding gazes. He didn't care at all. His pace was very normal, but Li Yongheng could still vaguely see some slight differences. He saw that, although it was still the same normal pace, he could feel a kind of incomparable determination within it. Lu Feng seemed to want to crush everything with every step he took. He wanted to penetrate all obstacles. This was a kind of willpower that pressed forward courageously. It was a kind of conviction that would never retreat in the face of anything. Vaguely, Li Yongheng seemed to see a kind of peerless edge. It was going to blossom today. Finally, under everyone's gaze, Lu Feng quietly arrived at the testing field. At this time, almost everyone's eyes were focused on him. Even the testers were no exception, because Lu Feng was the last one. Lu Feng, didn't you want to make me regret it? Let's see how you'll make me regret it today. Chapter 15. She didn't know why, but seeing Lu Feng like this, Li Yin felt an indescribable pain. So at this time, she couldn't help but speak up. This time, Lu Feng didn't ignore Li Yin. He looked at Li Yin and smiled again. But this smile, in the eyes of Li Yin and everyone else, was so strange. Because from this smile, everyone saw a kind of pity. Li Yin was furious and wanted to say something. But Lu Feng didn't give her a chance. In a few steps, he had already arrived in front of the tester. You should be very clear about the method of the test. Then, you can start directly. The tester didn't say anything and just handed the instrument to Lu Feng. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on him once again. But in the face of this, Lu Feng gently shook his head. He didn't take the instrument from the tester's hand. Everyone was slightly surprised. Lu Feng finally spoke slowly. What I want to test is not this. Hearing Lu Feng's words, everyone was slightly stunned. Although Lu Feng didn't have much talent, he was a warrior who cultivated his body. This was without a doubt. Many of the students around knew Lu Feng when they were in junior high. From then on, they saw Lu Feng as a figure who used all his time to cultivate his body in order to become a warrior. But now, Lu Feng said that he didn't want to test this. Wang Chu was slightly stunned, but he quickly reacted. He looked at Lu Feng and suddenly burst into laughter. Vaguely, it seemed that he was laughing so hard that even tears seemed to come out. One of his trembling hands pointed at Lu Feng, while the other hand was holding his stomach. Wang Chu laughed almost crazily. He said he actually wants to take the test to become a psychic. He is a warrior. He wants to become a psychic. He couldn't say the rest. His appearance was as exaggerated as it could be. Beside him, Li Yin also had a mocking smile on his face. Everyone frowned slightly when they saw King's District, although they didn't understand why Lu Feng would do that. However, the appearance of the King's District was too exaggerated. However, these people didn't say anything. This was because they knew the background of the King District. They didn't want to, couldn't, and didn't dare to offend a disciple of such a powerful family. Lu Feng looked at Wang Chu, who was laughing crazily, with a mocking smile on his face. He turned around and walked to the psychic testing area. He didn't say anything and just took the instrument from the tester's hand. Just like that, under everyone's gaze, he put the device on his head. It was fast, but also incomparably slow. After a few seconds, or a few dozen seconds, a ding sound came from the testing device. Everyone's attention was focused on the device. Looking at the numbers that appeared on the display, everyone was stunned. At this time, Wang Chu finally stopped laughing when he felt the strange atmosphere around him. He looked at Lu Feng with a puzzled expression. However, in the next moment, he was also stunned. At this moment, the entire place was silent. Even their school's headmaster had turned his gaze to this side. Finally, with a burst of ecstatic laughter, the quiet atmosphere was broken. I knew it. I knew you could do it. Lu Feng, you're so cool. You're worthy of being my brother. Li Yongheng, you're so cool. On the display, a number was quietly flashing. 1037. 1037. This wasn't a very big number. However, in everyone's eyes at this moment, it was extremely eye-catching and dazzling. This was because the number had exceeded 1. This also meant one thing. Lu Feng's mind power had broken through to the first condensing stage. Breaking through to the first condensing stage meant that he had become a beginner psychic. In an instant, the entire auditorium exploded with endless noise. Everyone was talking about it. They looked at Lu Feng in disbelief, as if they had never seen this young figure before. A beginner psychic. Although it was only at the elementary level, to this group of students, there was no one who did not know the meaning behind it. If Lu Feng was only a beginner warrior, it would at most cause a little bit of discussion. There wouldn't be much of a stir. However, he was a beginner psychic. How could a psychic compare to a warrior's status? Needless to say, the ratio of 1 in 1,000 warriors to a psychic was enough to explain everything. This ratio was enough to prove the nobility and rarity of a psychic. As for Lu Feng, this ordinary person who had painstakingly cultivated his body for 7 years, but had not even reached half a star, his true identity was actually a psyche master. In an instant, countless fiery gazes were cast at Lu Feng. However, Lu Feng didn't feel the slightest bit strange about this. He looked at the examiner in front of him and said softly, "So now, could I be considered to have passed the assessment?" Lu Feng's words caused the examiner to be startled awake. He looked at Lu Feng, and his eyes were also filled with excitement. Although the Federal University could recruit many students in the entire Cymbidium every year, there were only about 50 psychics among them. Among them, more than 80% had already been registered or had already been confirmed. The number of psychics who could be found in such an assessment was probably less than 10. Furthermore, not all of these people would enter the Federal University. He had never imagined that he would actually be able to recruit a psychic in this city. This kind of result would undoubtedly be of great help to his future development. I really didn't expect that there would be a genius like you in this second-grade city. It wasn't just him. Perhaps no one would have thought that a psychic who wasn't registered in this second-grade city would actually walk out. This was undoubtedly inconceivable. The entire Cymbidium had one central city, 17 first-grade cities, and more than 100 second-grade cities. Most of the psychics who were randomly recruited appeared in these first-grade cities. The probability of a psychic like Lu Feng appearing in a second-grade city was really too rare. It had almost never happened before. Hearing the examiner's words, Lu Feng smiled slightly, but didn't say anything. He knew that if it weren't for that accident, if it weren't for what happened in his space of consciousness, if it weren't for the existence of the Origin Sutra, then today's situation definitely wouldn't have happened. The examiner handed the form in his hand to Lu Feng and gave up on the rest of the assessment. He stood beside Lu Feng and personally guided Lu Feng to fill in the form. Very quickly, the form in his hand was completed. At this moment, whether it was the examiner or Li Yongheng beside Lu Feng, they all let out a long sigh of relief. After everything was done, the examiner looked at Lu Feng and said, "When school starts, you will be notified one by one. Before school starts, the admission notice will be sent to your personal identity database through the Sky Network. When the time comes, take note of it and don't miss the start of school." Lu Feng nodded slightly. He put away the attachment of the form, opened the Sky Network that he carried with him, scanned it, and turned to leave. Looking at Lu Feng's back, Everyone was filled with the same strange emotion. At this moment, they finally understood the meaning of Lu Feng's gaze when he looked at Li Yan previously. That was pity. That was indeed pity. At this moment, many people looked at Li Yan with eyes full of pity. Almost everyone knew about the relationship between Lu Feng and Li Yan. After all, Wang Chu didn't have the slightest intention of hiding it in order to deal a blow to Lu Feng. But now, all the previous blows seemed to have become a joke. If Lu Feng and Wang Chu were to be compared, they weren't that far apart. Although Wang Chu's family was indeed powerful, Lu Feng's family was really rich. Most importantly, Lu Feng's parents were rumored to be high-ranking executives of the BUCC Corporation. BUCC was one of the top few super intergalactic consortiums in the entire Federation. Although they were commercial in nature, their influence was equally terrifying. Therefore, when it came to family matters, the two of them were basically the same. In terms of appearance, there was no comparison at all. There was no need to say much about Lu Feng's appearance. One could tell just by looking at the expressions of the girls. Originally, the only thing that could completely overwhelm Lu Feng in King District was his talent. But now, after Lu Feng had become a beginner psychic, the so-called talent had become a joke. He, Lu Feng, was the true genius. He was the genius of the entire Symbidium. In general, the current Lu Feng was no longer someone Wang Chu could compare to. Li Yan had given up on Lu Feng for Wang Chu. Now it seemed really sad. She was indeed worthy of pity. Lu Feng walked step by step. Everyone around him involuntarily made way for him. Vaguely, everyone already knew that the current Lu Feng was no longer the Lu Feng of the past. His identity had undergone an earth-shattering change. No matter how difficult it had been for him to walk on the path of a warrior, he had now transformed into a genius that everyone looked up to. He had become the most honorable psychic master among all professions. Lu Feng was no longer the trash they could ridicule at will. His talent was no longer limited to a small area and a small city. Step by step, just when everyone thought that Lu Feng was about to leave, he suddenly stopped. Looking at the person in front of Lu Feng, everyone around him had a look of schadenfreude on their faces. This was because the person standing in front of Lu Feng was a warrior who had directly entered the Federal University through special recruitment. His name was Zhao Chong. Chapter 16. As he faced Lu Feng, Zhao Chong no longer had the same provocative look he had had when he'd first met Lu Feng. He might have been talented enough to become a beginner warrior before entering university, so he could be considered a genius. However, the only reason he dared to provoke Lu Feng was because he had the backing of the King District. Otherwise, although such an ordinary person was a genius, he wasn't outstanding enough to attract the attention of the entire Federation. When he faced Lu Feng, he simply didn't have enough confidence to provoke him. Now that Lu Feng had completed his shocking transformation and returned as a king, he didn't even have the courage to look at Lu Feng in the eye. Looking at the unusually silent Zhao Chong in front of him, Lu Feng smiled. This time, it was an unusually deep and unbridled smile. One could even vaguely hear a hint of madness in it. I remember you once called me a piece of trash, so now, when I'm standing here again, can you repeat it again? Can you say it again in front of everyone? Lu Feng asked himself. He wasn't a saint. He couldn't be like the saints in the ancient legends, who didn't eat the food of mortals. As for those who provoked him, those who insulted him, and those who hurt him, he would remember them. He would always remember them. This wasn't a petty person, but a true temperament. Lu Feng didn't need to care about what other people said. He just needed to have a clear conscience and follow his heart. When they heard Lu Feng's words, everyone fell silent. Zhao Chong even trembled slightly. Repeat it? Would he dare say it again in front of Lu Feng, who had become a beginner psychic and was incomparably honorable? Lu Feng's smile was still the same. He opened his mouth once more. However, this time, the words he said stunned everyone once again. If you don't dare, then let's fight. Use your fists and fight. Let me tell you, do you really not dare to do it? Today, under the watchful eyes of so many people, under the witness of so many people, fight me fair and square, just like 3 days ago. Do you dare? Today, in front of everyone's eyes, in front of everyone's eyes, in front of everyone's eyes, in front of everyone's witness, with my identity, with myself, with the body that was trashed 3 days ago, I challenge you. Do you dare to fight? Silence, complete silence. Everyone looked at Lu Feng in disbelief. They couldn't understand why this true genius would be so crazy at this moment. So stupid. Stupid. It was just stupid. This was definitely a very stupid thing to do. It was true that Lu Feng was a genius. No one could deny this. He had become a beginner psychic master. Such a talent was enough to make him stand out among millions of people of the same age. However, he was still a beginner psychic. At the same level, a psychic couldn't compete with a warrior. This was an unchanging truth since time immemorial. Lu Feng's opponent was a warrior. A beginner warrior, or even a mid-beginner warrior. The power in his body had already reached the level of a 3-star. Lu Feng only needed a focus. There was simply no possibility of confrontation between the two of them. However, Lu Feng actually wanted to challenge such a warrior for the sake of their previous grudges. This was really too stupid. Lu Feng, don't be impulsive. You are a psychic, and your status is many times higher than his. Fighting with him will really damage your status as a psychic, Li Yongheng said with a hint of anxiety. He naturally understood all this. If Lu Feng really fought with Zhao Chong, the result would be obvious. He didn't want Lu Feng to get hurt on a day like today. However, this time, Lu Feng still had his own opinions. He looked at Li Yongheng and finally shook his head gently. Then, he looked at Zhao Chong again. Are you going to fight or not? I'll bet on your honor as a warrior. Do you dare to fight or not? Lu Feng's voice grew louder and louder. In the end, only his resounding echoes existed in the entire vast auditorium. At this point, there was no way out anymore. Finally, Zhao Chong raised his head. He looked at Lu Feng with an extremely complicated expression. If he could, he really didn't want to be in the Imperial District. Given his status as a mid-beginner warrior, it wouldn't be a problem for him to enter the Federal University. If he hadn't coveted his status as a specially enrolled student, if it hadn't been for the instigation of the Imperial District, how could he have possibly made an enemy of Lu Feng, someone with a promising future? Now, it was too late to think about anything. There was no way out for him. He stretched out his arm and gently hammered his chest. Everything was self-evident. Everyone retreated, opening up a space so that they could fight without worry. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Li Yongheng finally didn't say anything. After a deep sigh, he also made a space for them. As a good brother of Lu Feng, Li Yongheng knew Lu Feng's character very well. Once Lu Feng was serious, other people's words had no effect at all. Nothing could change what he had decided on. This was Lu Feng, the gentle and quiet, but extremely paranoid, even a little crazy Lu Feng. Soon, an empty space appeared between the two. In the field, there were only two people, Lu Feng and Zhao Chong. They looked at each other. Then they bowed slightly to each other. These were the traditional etiquettes that warriors should have before a battle. After doing all this, Zhao Chong didn't hesitate at all and directly broke out all his aura. He knew that if he faced Lu Feng, he would definitely be crushed. But even so, he didn't relax at all. Anyway, since he had already offended him, he might as well continue to offend him once more. He had already let go of everything. The powerful aura filled the surrounding dozens of square meters. Even if they were separated by dozens of meters, many students who hadn't become warriors could still feel a terrifying pressure. Is this the power of a warrior? So powerful. A beginner middle stage warrior, too powerful. Zhao Chong is definitely not a simple beginner middle stage warrior. Such power, at least the power of a 4-star warrior. Many students who had become warriors exclaimed. They could accurately feel that such an aura was definitely not something that a beginner middle stage warrior could use. Such a powerful aura, at least a 4-star warrior could use it. Everyone looked at Lu Feng with eyes full of sympathy. In the face of a 4-star warrior, He didn't have the slightest resistance at all. Li Yongheng at the side clenched his fists fiercely. He was now a 9-star peak beginner warrior. If it wasn't for the sake of improving his talent, he would have become a mid-stage warrior long ago. And he could easily feel the star level represented by such an aura. This was not a 3-star power at all. He wasn't even a 4-star warrior. Zhao Chong was a 5-star warrior. He was a beginner warrior who had reached the peak of the intermediate stage. If it was him, Li Yongheng, facing such a warrior, there was no doubt that with his powerful talent and shallow understanding of martial arts, he could easily crush him. But Lu Feng, he definitely couldn't be a match for such a warrior. Looking at the surging aura of Zhao Chong, Lu Feng showed his extraordinary side. In such an aura, he seemed to be the same as before, without the slightest change. He opened his mouth slightly, with a strange emotion. I didn't expect that you're not just a 3-star warrior anymore. When you fought with me at that time, I'm afraid you also held back. Hearing this, Zhao Chong didn't say anything. He just looked at Lu Feng with a look of disdain. So what? This time, I'll let you have a good look at the real strength of Zhao Chong. The moment his voice fell, Zhao Chong disappeared. It wasn't that he already had the ability to travel through space like those terrifying warriors, but that his speed had reached an extreme level, exceeding the limit that many people could see. This was incomparably terrifying. In the next moment, when Zhao Chong appeared again, there was only one fist in his hand. It was an iron fist that was full of power and dominance. Although he couldn't and didn't dare to kill Lu Feng, this time, he also wanted to make Lu Feng pay the price that he deserved. He wanted to let him know how ignorant he was to provoke him like this, to call him out so stupidly. Looking at such a fist, many people began to cry out in alarm. They seemed to have already seen Lu Feng's flesh and blood splattering everywhere, and his incomparably miserable appearance. Behind Lu Feng, the examiner teacher's expression changed slightly. Beside him, a federal university teacher who was conducting the warrior test was already prepared to make a move. For a genius like Lu Feng, how could they watch him suffer such a heavy injury? Therefore, at this moment, they already couldn't care less about who provoked him first, because in their eyes, Lu Feng was far from being a beginner warrior and a so-called rule that could be compared to him. However, just as they were about to make a move, just as many girls closed their eyes and trembled slightly, just as many warriors were shocked, just as Li Yongheng was about to riot, everyone became still again. They looked at everything in front of them, almost lifeless. Then, they finally murmured out, How is this possible? This is absolutely impossible. I don't believe it. I definitely won't believe it. Zhao Chong looked at Lu Feng in front of him, looked at the figure who had left his original position and appeared in front of him, firmly grasping his invincible iron fist. He couldn't believe it no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't believe that the powerful attack that he was so proud of was so powerfully defeated by a trash and so easily resolved. Feeling Zhao Chong's shock, Lu Feng still had that kind of smile on his face, the kind of mocking smile. Is this your strength? This is all the strength you've been hiding? With this kind of strength, you want to mock me? Mock me for being a trash. You really don't have the qualifications. Chapter 17. Indeed, Zhao Chong was a 5-star primary warrior and had already reached the peak of the intermediate primary warrior. But so what? He, Lu Feng, had already become a primary warrior. Moreover, he was a primary warrior who could unleash 4 times the power. He was a 1-star warrior, and when he unleashed 4 times the power, that was the strength of a 4-star warrior. And he, in the past few years, had experienced countless battles in the virtual battle space, and his experience was incomparably terrifying. It was far from what Zhao Chong could compare with. In addition to those that he had condensed, although they had not yet become primary techniques, they were already incomparably powerful moves. The power that Lu Feng used when he caught Zhao Chong's powerful blow just now had far exceeded that of a 5-star warrior. Therefore, Zhao Chong's blow was nothing to him at all. The next moment, Lu Feng gently waved his hand and let Zhao Chong return to his original position. For Lu Fenglai, when Zhao Chong was stunned just now, he had countless opportunities to defeat Zhao Chong or even directly obliterate him. But he did not do so, because Lu Feng wanted to do it in front of everyone. With the most powerful blow, he would completely wash away the person who had humiliated him before. In order to prove himself, he also exposed his trump card of becoming a primary warrior. Perhaps a beginner psychic could become a genius on the level of a planet. As for a primary warrior, he could only be regarded as a regional genius. But with the dual identity of a primary warrior and a psychic, it was obviously not a planet-level genius that could be described. This, at least, was a genius close to the starry sky level. If it was in the past, with Lu Feng's cautious character, he might have chosen to keep a trump card. But now he did not have that kind of thought, because he knew that in such a society, if he wanted to get more resources, then he had to show enough talent. Only in this way could he enter the eyes of many higher-ups and obtain an unlimited supply of resources, so that he could cultivate more quickly without worries. Lu Feng looked at Zhao Chong, who was still in shock. His smile widened, and there seemed to be a hint of madness in it. He turned around and scanned the tens of thousands of students in the auditorium. Finally, his gaze landed on Wang Chu, whose face was ashen. From today onwards, I'll give you the name Trash. Hearing this, Wang Chu clenched his fists tightly, but he didn't say or do anything. Because at this moment, after Lu Feng displayed such strength, there was no need to say anything. Geniuses like this were rare even in the entire Cymbidium. Even in Hesser Starry Sky, which encompassed dozens of planets, they were considered first-rate geniuses. In front of Lu Feng, he had indeed become a joke, a trash. Next to Wang Chu, Lian's face was also very bleak. Although no one around her said anything, she could easily feel the pity in the eyes of the people around her. After Lu Feng had revealed everything, his existence was no longer something that could be compared to. Compared to the genius that he was now, his background had already become a joke. Originally, she had had the opportunity to be with such an outstanding genius and even walk down the aisle. However, she had shattered all of this with her own hands. She had easily pushed away this opportunity that countless girls would go crazy over. Lu Feng looked at Zhao Chong again and finally wiped the smile off his face. He sighed deeply. His eyes no longer had the same expression as before. Let's end everything like this. After venting his anger on Zhao Chong and Wang Chu, Lu Feng no longer felt the slightest bit of emotion. They were no longer in the same world as him. In the end, these people were just fleeting clouds. Perhaps he would be able to recall them after a long time, when he relaxed and reminisced. At most, that was all he could remember. After letting go of everything, Lu Feng felt as though his shackles had been shattered. It was also in an instant that he felt as though he had entered a miraculous state. At this moment, everything around him seemed to be under his control. It was as if everything had become a part of his body. In the haze, this clearly existing figure seemed to have become nothingness. It was clearly visible to the naked eye, but it seemed as if it had completely disappeared. Magical, incomparably magical. How is this possible? This is battle intent. How could he comprehend such a heaven-defying power? A psychic and a beginner warrior. How could he enter the battle intent just like that? At this moment, some people were shocked again. However, only a small number of people were shocked. However, the shock of these people was even more unbelievable than the shock of everyone in the auditorium. This was because these people were the higher-ups of the school and the testers and teachers of the Federal University. Ignoring these people, Lu Feng finally threw a punch. In the haze, the feeling of complete control covered every corner of Lu Feng's body. It filled his movements with an incomprehensible profoundness. It was as if his movements contained all the truths that existed in this world, and there was a wonderful addition to it. Every single movement was incomparably coordinated. Vaguely, he actually mobilized a lot of power that existed in the unseen world, but didn't seem to exist. One punch, it was still one punch. It was different from Zhao Chang's powerful and domineering punch from before. This punch didn't have much of a domineering aura. However, it was this seemingly gentle punch that caused Zhao Chang to be stunned. Because at this moment, he couldn't make any reaction. Seeing this scene, someone made a move. It was the figure of a middle-aged man. He was Lu Feng's principal. He was originally standing far away, but in the next moment, he had already appeared in front of Lu Feng. Beside him, a few teachers of the Federal University had also arrived. Their expressions were cautious as they faced Lu Feng's attack head-on. In an instant, the collision occurred. That gentle punch displayed an absolutely domineering and terrifying power. It was just the aftermath of the collision, but it gave off the illusion of an air explosion. Many of the surrounding students took a few steps back. Their faces were filled with shock. They didn't understand how a mere collision could create such a powerful aura. What shocked them the most was the figure in front of them, who waved this punch. He was actually still in the arena. Lu Feng. How can Lu Feng be so strong? Strong, really unimaginably strong. Because he didn't retreat, didn't move. This was strength that shocked everyone. Because his opponent at this moment wasn't Zhao Chang, a beginner warrior, but their principal. This legendary, terrifying existence who had already become a warrior. Although these people also knew that just now wasn't the principal's true strength, Lu Feng was able to face a punch head-on without changing his stance. This was enough to prove his strength. Such strength wasn't something that an intermediate beginner warrior could compare to. In the center of the arena, Lu Feng was still the same as before. In his eyes, other than persistence and a burning will, there seemed to be nothing else. In the next moment, he moved again. Under everyone's horrified gazes, Lu Feng once again swung his fist. And this time, his opponent wasn't Zhao Chang. His opponent was the principal who had already become a warrior. Looking at Lu Feng's appearance, the principal didn't show any anger. What he had was a kind of excitement, a kind of incomparable excitement. This is the will to fight. What a powerful enhancement. It's worthy of the will that only those super geniuses can comprehend. Now your strength is no less than any peak beginner warrior. Let me see where your limit is. His figure kept dodging. In the face of Lu Feng's storm-like bombardment, the principal always dodged and never really made a move. Although the current Lu Feng had entered a special domain and his strength had skyrocketed, there was still a limit. However, there was a limit to his strength. If the principal really unleashed his power, even if it was just a tiny bit, it would be enough to easily destroy Lu Feng. Looking at Lu Feng, who was constantly attacking the principal in the arena, the surrounding students' expressions became more and more shocked. If Lu Feng relied on his amazing talent to shock them before, then now, Lu Feng's fighting skills made these people feel even more incredulous. They didn't understand why Lu Feng had such incredible skills. Not to mention a beginner warrior. Even if a real intermediate warrior was here, they would absolutely be unable to do Lu Feng's movements. The surrounding students, who didn't really understand, were already shocked. As for the principal who was fighting Lu Feng, the surrounding Federal University teachers, who were standing cautiously at the side, were even more shocked. As powerful warriors, they naturally understood how terrifying Lu Feng's current battle prowess was. Although each of Lu Feng's punches and kicks were so terrifying after entering the will to fight, it also proved that Lu Feng had already mastered these skills. Now that he had entered the will to fight, he unconsciously displayed all the skills he had learned. For a young existence to be able to display such combat skills, it was without a doubt exceptionally terrifying. At first, I thought we were lucky to find a psychic genius, but I didn't expect this psychic genius to be even more terrifying and incredible on the path of a warrior. Even intermediate warriors who have gone through several years of systematic training are far from being able to do these fighting skills and experience. He probably never learned any techniques, so naturally, he couldn't specially comprehend the essence of those techniques. But now he has already displayed dozens of types of essence. This is a genius, a super genius, and one of the most terrifying fighting geniuses. Compared to his psychic talent, this is truly terrifying. Chapter 18. A teacher from the Federal University looked at the figure shuttling back and forth in the field and finally expressed his thoughts emotionally. Beside him, the other teachers also nodded in agreement. However, a moment later, one of the teachers suddenly stopped. He looked at Lu Feng, whose movements are getting simpler and simpler. His expression was filled with disbelief. How is this possible? Once again, it was impossible, and yet another exclamation of surprise. They didn't know how many times this young man had let out such a cry of shock and surprise today. However, they believed that the miracle this young man brought would definitely not stop at what they were seeing now. The future, his future, would definitely appear to create miracles. He's actually here. Hearing that teacher's words, the other teachers began to focus on Lu Feng in the field. In the next moment, the sound of gasps could be heard. They looked at the figure, whose movements were already simple, yet seemed to be even more complicated. They were all filled with shock. Sure enough, you guessed right. He's actually using this battle to condense his own combat technique. At this moment, Lu Feng was fighting. Originally, these people were slightly puzzled by the battle between Lu Feng and the principal. They all knew how terrifying the battle will was, but they also knew that after entering the battle will, they didn't completely lose their will and would be controlled by their battle instincts. In such a state, their thoughts were clearer. However, after the martial warrior principal made his move, Lu Feng, who should have understood the difference and stopped, continued to make his move. Such a scene made them feel slightly puzzled. Now they finally understood. They finally understood Lu Feng's plan. He wanted to use this battle to fuse all his previous experience and the essence of all the combat techniques he had comprehended into one and turn them into his own combat technique. A beginner warrior was actually going to create a martial technique that belonged solely to him in such a state. Such a genius was absolutely world-shocking. The teachers looked at each other. There was no longer joy in their eyes, but deep shock. Such a genius was no longer someone they could judge or describe. In the next moment, a teacher seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly erupted with a trembling aura. At this moment, everyone in the field was enveloped by his aura. In an instant, this aura was pushed to the limit by him. Many students seemed to have suffered a heavy blow, and all of them fainted on the ground. At this moment, there were only a few people in the auditorium that were still conscious. And these few people, other than the school's higher-ups, were only the teachers from the Federal University. Although the higher-ups of the school were slightly dissatisfied with the teacher's actions just now. However, it didn't stop him. The reason for that was because they knew that this was the best way to deal with it. After all, some things weren't suitable for many people to know. In the arena, Lu Feng's movements were already limited. There were only a few moves back and forth. But at this moment, the principal's face was filled with excitement. He knew that when Lu Feng's, and that was the moment when he would fuse all the essence of his skills into one. At that time, a brand new elementary combat technique would be born, and it would appear in the hands of a beginner warrior. One punch, another punch. It became simpler and simpler, more and more ordinary. However, within this simplicity and ordinariness was an indescribable complexity. This punch was no longer as plain as it had been before, and it contained countless changes, and there were dozens of essences in it. This had already formed an embryonic form of Lu Feng's own technique. Gradually, one of the remaining moves disappeared from the concept. Lu Feng was now repeatedly using only 3 moves. Each of these 3 moves was the absolute essence, and they were the power that fused the essence of many skills. Although in the eyes of those advanced warriors who had comprehended intermediate and above combat techniques, it was nothing. But now, the remaining 3 moves were difficult for ordinary intermediate warriors to comprehend. What a peerless genius! Such an existence, except for those children of powerful families, rarely appears in ordinary times. Looking at the entire galaxy of the Federation, this young man can be considered a genius. As long as he is nurtured well, it is very likely that he will break the shackles in the future and become a divine martial artist. After all, he is an existence that has entered the will of battle. Looking at Lu Feng, who was beginning to fuse the 3 moves into 2, a Federal University teacher couldn't help but sigh. Comprehending the will of battle also meant that their future limits would not be that of ordinary warriors. They were very likely to comprehend the heart of heaven and earth, fuse the power of God, and step into the true mythical realm of warriors, the divine martial artist realm. Once they became a divine martial artist, they would really be a super strong warrior of a galaxy. Although there were no less than 100 galaxies in the Federation, to be able to become a strong warrior of a galaxy was absolutely shocking. After all, the number of planets in a galaxy exceeded 10,000, and the population was calculated in units of 10 trillion. After becoming a martial artist, creating a basic cultivation method is as easy as flipping one's hand. But to be able to do this in the realm of beginner warriors is really too rare. This kind of talent is almost comparable to those ancient families with great inheritances. I really can't imagine how our Cymbidium could give birth to such a genius. He didn't understand, and the other teachers around him were the same. However, it was clear that the birth of such a genius was only beneficial to the Cymbidium, and it was also because of this reason that they directly took action and knocked out many students. It was to ensure that before Lu Feng became strong enough, he would not be disturbed. See, only the last move is left. As long as the last 2 moves are completely fused into one, then he will really create a not small miracle. In the field, Lu Feng's movements had already slowed down. The same was true for the principal. He didn't attack from beginning to end, only continuously using various moves to block Lu Feng. Although his movements were slow, the essence contained within them was growing more and more. Faintly, the changes within had increased from 10 to more than 30. For an ordinary elementary technique, you only need to fuse more than 10 types to be considered a success. And starting from 10 types, every additional type of essence that is fused into the technique will increase the power of the technique by a level. Even for those martial artists who put in a little effort to condense the primary cultivation methods, the number of essences in them was only 30. But this young man has already fused more than 30 types. I believe that as long as this last move is fused, then the elementary technique that he creates will most likely fuse 40 types of essence into it. This is almost comparable to a primary technique created by a high-level evolution period martial artist. Evolution Stage Warrior was the lowest level among warriors. But even so, they were still warriors. With their own martial will, they would be able to comprehend the existence of martial arts. Any elementary, middle, or even high-grade cultivation technique would be easily grasped. However, if they wanted to create an elementary cultivation technique that was the fusion of 40 different essences, they would need to put in a lot of effort to do so. And now, the young man in front of them was transforming towards that step. He seemed to be about to succeed. Finally, just as everyone was thinking and feeling shocked, the final transformation came. At this moment, not only were they excited, but even the principal who was fighting with Lu Feng also stopped moving, his face filled with unconcealable excitement. As a principal, there was nothing more exciting than seeing a genius being born in his own school. In front of them, Lu Feng had already stopped all his movements. At this moment, he stood rooted to the ground, as if he had forgotten everything. His movements were incomparably slow. Vaguely, he was only repeating one move. That was the only move, the essence that remained after fusing everything. Looking at Lu Feng's movements, many existences were extremely excited. Unknowingly, their eyes were filled with nervousness, their mouths involuntarily muttering. 1 type, 2 types, 3 types, 11 types, 12 types, 13 types, 30 types. It's not over, there's more. 31 types, 32 types. When the essence of the evolved technique exceeded 30 types, the teachers finally stopped hiding their surprise. No matter how many types of essence could be fused into the elementary technique created by Lu Feng, as long as he could break through 30 types, then it would be a miracle, an unimaginable breakthrough. 39 types, 39 types, it's already 39 types. Can he break through 40 types? When it came to 39 types, Lu Feng's movements were already extremely slow, as if he had reached his limit. Looking at the elementary technique that was about to be completed, the teachers' faces were filled with regret. Although there was only one type difference between 39 types and 40 types of essence. However, there was a difference of one level between the two. The elementary technique with 39 types of essence could only increase one's strength by 3 times. Although it was more powerful than other techniques that contained more than 30 types of martial skill essences, it still couldn't reach the level of a 4-fold increase. This was really regrettable. However, he still has a chance. As long as he is given enough time and comprehended enough cultivation methods, then one day, he will definitely be able to comprehend the essence of 100 types of cultivation methods. Moreover, he will be able to fuse these 100 types of battle skill essences into martial skill essences and create his own intermediate cultivation method. He can do it. He can definitely do it. Chapter 19. Just when everyone thought it was about to end, Lu Feng's movements suddenly moved. Finally, in their eyes, the 40th type of evolution essence appeared. 40 types. A beginner cultivation method with a 4-fold amplification. Heaven-defying. Truly heaven-defying. What a terrifying perception. What a terrifying will to fight. The moment he succeeded, everyone was silent. Although beginner cultivation methods weren't much, and they even had beginner cultivation methods that could amplify the same realm by 8 or 9 times, the difference between the two was simply incomparable. This was condensed by Lu Feng himself, and those cultivation methods that could amplify the same realm by 6 times were all created by some truly powerful people. Their own realms were far higher than Lu Feng's by countless times. Their combat experience was even more unparalleled. For them, ordinary mid-level cultivation techniques were easy to learn and they could comprehend in an instant. Therefore, it wasn't too difficult to create a beginner cultivation method that could fuse 80 to 90 types of essence. Moreover, those kinds of cultivation methods were mostly the products of their failures after creating intermediate cultivation methods. But what about Lu Feng? He was only a beginner warrior, and even someone who hadn't been a beginner warrior for long. To be able to create a cultivation method that was exclusive to oneself in the same realm, this was without a doubt absolutely shocking and universally shocking. The limitation of intermediate cultivation methods is to be able to evolve and fuse hundreds of battle skill essences into one, and fuse these hundreds of battle skill essences into one to become a battle skill essence. But now he has only just condensed his own cultivation method, and there are already 40 types of battle skill essences in it. As long as he is given a little more time, I'm afraid it won't be too difficult to evolve his cultivation method into an intermediate cultivation method. What a terrifying comprehension talent. Soon, Lu Feng gradually woke up. At this moment, his eyes were incomparably tranquil. There was no ecstasy after success, nor any loss of self-control. He just stood there quietly. Not long after, Lu Feng looked at the principal in front of him and suddenly bowed respectfully. The principal didn't dodge and just accepted Lu Feng's bow. This time, if it wasn't him but someone else, Lu Feng wouldn't have been able to condense his primary cultivation method so easily. It could be said that he accepted this bow with a clear conscience. After bowing respectfully, Lu Feng straightened his back. He looked at the principal and said, "Thank you for your help this time." Lu Feng will never forget it. Lu Feng would never forget the people who had humiliated and hurt him. As for those who had helped him, Lu Feng would always remember them. This was him, the real Lu Feng. You must be Lu Feng. I didn't expect our school to have a genius like you. I've heard of your name before, but at that time, the evaluation of your aptitude wasn't very high. As the principal, it was impossible for him to remember every single student. However, there were still some special individuals whom he knew. For example, every time a special enrollment student wanted to obtain this quota, the principal's approval was required. Therefore, he still remembered Lu Feng's name. Hearing the principal's words, Lu Feng just smiled and didn't say anything. This was because he knew that if things had developed normally, he could only helplessly accept reality and be a depressed child at home. However, fate was so wonderful. Because of the inexplicable existence in his mind space, he had transformed. He had become a peerless genius that everyone had to respect. Even this time, by virtue of the explosion, when he entered that wonderful state, he had melted everything he had learned in the past 7 years into one, and finally created his own primary cultivation method at the level of a primary warrior. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, the principal knew that he didn't want to say anything. Therefore, he didn't continue to ask. I don't need you to repay me with anything. I just need you to remember that you are a student of this school. You will always be a part of this school. After saying this, he gently patted Lu Feng's shoulder, then turned and walked out of the auditorium. Wake these students up in a while. That Federal University teacher was very appropriate. He only made them unconscious. His words were incomparably calm. But hearing this, a few Federal University recruitment teachers still showed an awkward smile. They could naturally hear the slight dissatisfaction in the principal's voice. But regarding this, they could only apologize. After all, compared to the young man in front of them, just making the students unconscious was really nothing. A few of the school's higher-ups nodded lightly, then began to wake the students up. Looking at the tens of thousands of students lying on the ground, Lu Feng finally reacted. He wasn't an idiot. He only needed to think a little to understand the reason for everything just now. Looking at the people around him, Lu Feng showed an apologetic expression. Regarding this, he was also very helpless. If it wasn't for the release of his inner heart and suddenly entering a completely relieved state of mind, he definitely wouldn't have entered that wonderful realm. And if it wasn't for entering that wonderful realm, he definitely wouldn't have let go of everything and practiced his cultivation method here, wanting to condense a beginner-level cultivation method. Everything, in the end, was because of him. There's no need for you to do anything here. Leave with me. Beside Lu Feng, there were already a few Federal University teachers standing, and the person who spoke, Lu Feng had already noticed before. In the previous assessment, he didn't seem to have interfered at all. Only when Lu Feng became a beginner-level Psyche Master did he slightly notice. And now, it seemed that this teacher was the leader of these people. Hearing his words, Lu Feng nodded lightly, turned around, and left with him. They all knew that these people would wake up in a while. Some things weren't suitable to be said in front of these people. Soon, the few of them all left the auditorium. Standing on the tree-lined avenue outside, the leader of the teachers stopped in his tracks. He looked at Lu Feng with a strange and complicated look in his eyes. After being silent for a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "I didn't expect to meet a genius like you here." Lu Feng was silent. After a moment, the leader of the teachers smiled slightly. "No matter what, you're already a member of our Federal University. On the path of a warrior, your aptitude is much stronger than that of a Psyche Master. Why don't you change your major and directly enter the warrior department?" Lu Feng was still silent. After thinking for a moment, he finally raised his head again. "I'll still choose to be a Psyche Master." Hearing this, the few of them were slightly stunned. Although a Psyche Master was really honorable, just a beginner Psyche Master, in terms of status, was more honorable than high-level warrior. But in their opinion, Lu Feng's talent as a Psyche Master was far from comparable to that of a warrior. For a beginner warrior to be able to enter the battle will, to be able to condense his own beginner cultivation method, and to see his explosive power, it was probably very terrifying. If such a talent didn't become a warrior, it would be a waste of this talent. Why? Almost at the same time, they asked. And at this moment, Lu Feng smiled slightly. Because I like to become a Psyche Master. In the Federation, those who liked warriors were much more than Psyche Masters, and Lu Feng was the same. After all, since the beginning of the galaxy era, the one who really led the human race to the top of the galaxy was the Divine King. They were all peerless Divine King. As for them, they were all warriors who had walked over. From ancient times to the present, there might have been a few peerless Psyche Masters who could challenge the Divine King, but in the end, their role was still inferior to the Divine King. In the end, they didn't lead the human race to glory like the peerless Divine King. In every era, the strongest person under the starry sky must be the Divine King, must be the peerless Divine King who could defy the heavens and punish the world. Therefore, although Psyche Masters were honorable, but in the hearts of the human race, warriors were the most popular. Lu Feng was no exception. However, Lu Feng had his own calculations. Entering the warrior department, perhaps he could get the best training on the path of a warrior. But for those training, did Lu Feng really need it? With the existence of the devil true body, Lu Feng didn't have to worry about the cultivation method at all. And to him, the resources that the warrior needed were dispensable, as long as he could create a sufficient environment and endure enough hardships. Then for him, it would be enough. In order to achieve this, one had to have money. With enough support, he could perfect everything. Obviously, becoming a Psyche Master was much faster than becoming a warrior. As long as he could become a high-level Psyche Master, the Federation subsidies alone would be as high as a few million every month. And once he became a Psyche Master, it would be terrifying to an extraordinary extent. At that time, without relying on his family, he could also quickly cultivate the devil true body and the primordial scripture, these two supreme techniques. Seeing Lu Feng's determined look, the few people were silent. They didn't expect that Lu Feng would choose to be a Psyche Master. This was really inconceivable. But the choice was Lu Feng's. They couldn't change anything. Stopping the teacher next to him who was about to speak, the leading teacher smiled slightly. It's too early to say these things. Let's wait until school starts. During this time, I hope you can think about it carefully. After saying this, he led the few teachers who were still confused and left the place. Looking at their backs, Lu Feng knew that these people wouldn't give up. But even if they didn't give up, would Lu Feng give up? Slightly shrugging his shoulders, Lu Feng turned around and walked towards the auditorium again. This time, he was going to find Li Yongheng. Lu Feng knew that Li Yongheng would definitely ask him when he woke up. And for this friend, he also needed to think of an excuse to hide it. Chapter 20. The matter was dealt with very quickly because the teacher from the Federation knew his limits. He only made everyone slightly dizzy. Actually, there was no need for help. Many people had already gradually regained consciousness after they left. By the time Lu Feng returned, Li Yongheng was already sitting on the side in a daze. Looking at the dazed Li Yongheng, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of apology. He didn't stay any longer. He directly supported Li Yongheng and left the school. Along the way, as Lu Feng had expected, Li Yongheng, who had recovered, began to frantically ask Lu Feng questions. As for the answer, Lu Feng had already thought of it. He attributed everything to the spirit-sobering medicine that Li Yongheng had given him. According to Lu Feng, he was originally very talented as a psychic. With the help of the spirit-sobering medicine, he quickly broke through to become a beginner psychic. He didn't know what had happened, but after becoming a beginner psychic, he actually discovered that the advancement of a warrior had sped up. After taking some medicine prepared by his parents, he finally succeeded in breaking through yesterday. Li Yongheng didn't have much doubt about Lu Feng's explanation. Although he didn't know the reason behind it, he didn't ask any more questions. After all, there were many strange people in the Federation. They were like Lu Feng, suddenly becoming peerless geniuses. In Li Yongheng's eyes, Lu Feng should be such a person too. Soon, the two of them arrived at the fork in the road. Looking at the radiant Li Yongheng, Lu Feng felt a warm current from the bottom of his heart. Glancing at Lu Feng, Li Yongheng was silent for a moment. Finally, he said, "I won't be coming to find you for the next few days. Taking advantage of the holidays, my dad wants to send me to the military to train. He'll only let me out when school starts. Pity my beautiful holidays." At the end of his speech, Li Yongheng's face was already twisted. Li Yongheng's father said that he was going to send him to the army for training, so he definitely wasn't going to send him to the army to enjoy life. Lu Feng could imagine what kind of hardships Li Yongheng would have to go through in the army. Then, let's celebrate when you come back. After saying this, the two of them did not continue to be long-winded and directly separated. For Lu Fenglai, holidays were a rare opportunity. Once he got into the Federal University and became a primary warrior and psychic, it wouldn't be a problem for him to ask his parents for money. With money, he would be able to improve rapidly during this holiday. Looking at the gradually descending leader star, Lu Feng fiercely clenched his fist. Before school starts, I must train myself hard. I will let everyone see that the trash of the past will eventually grow and reach a height that you can never reach. Although Lu Feng had already set a goal, he didn't immediately implement it during the holidays. After all, he was still a 17-year-old young man. Generally, young people were more playful. For someone like Lu Feng, who could plan to cultivate from scratch, it was already very good. After returning home, Lu Feng didn't immediately cultivate, but chose to relax. For him, after being humiliated for 17 years, he finally turned the tables and completed an unprecedented transformation. That kind of change made him feel excited. Therefore, Lu Feng also chose to relax. He picked up the game that he was obsessed with for a period of time and played happily for a few days. For Lu Fenglai, these few days could be said to be really relaxing. In the past, he usually spent his holidays with Li Yin. At that time, Lu Feng and Li Yin were still together, and Li Yin kept a close eye on Lu Feng. Generally, as long as she had time, she would come to Lu Feng. However, it was different now. Without her, Lu Feng could finally completely let go and be unrestrained. In this way, when a week was over, Lu Feng didn't indulge in such a relaxed life anymore. On this day, Lu Feng got out of bed early. After becoming a junior psychic, the amount of time he had to rest a day was reduced a lot. For him, who practiced the primordial scripture, there was almost no problem for him to not sleep for a few days. Of course, this situation caused Lu Feng to lose his hobby of lazing in bed. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Lu Feng got out of bed on time, walked into the kitchen, and took out the food that he had bought in advance. After eating to his heart's content, Lu Feng officially started to train. Previously, in the school hall, with the help of the principal and the uniqueness of his fighting will, he successfully comprehended his own cultivation. He had successfully comprehended his own cultivation method, although it was only at the elementary level. But for Lu Feng, the significance of this elementary level cultivation method was incomparable to any other cultivation method, because this was his own comprehension, and it was a junior level cultivation method that belonged exclusively to him. The significance of an exclusive cultivation method was to be able to fully exert the power of this set of cultivation method. The limit of Lu Feng's set of cultivation method was a fourfold increase, so, as long as he fully unleashed his combat power, he could achieve a fourfold increase. However, other cultivation methods were different. Even if it was the legendary supreme cultivation method that surpassed the stars, even if they had a terrifying ninefold increase in the cultivation stage of a junior warrior, to fully exert this ninefold increase in combat power as a junior warrior, it would take a huge amount of time. As for those who possessed such a supreme cultivation technique, which one of them wasn't in existence at the level of a giant in the Federation? Almost all of their children had the inheritance of a great bloodline, and their talents were incomparably amazing. As long as they were willing, the time needed to advance from a junior warrior to an intermediate warrior was dozens of times that of an ordinary person. But if they wanted to comprehend the true essence of those supreme cultivation methods at the junior level, they would need to slow down their cultivation speed. And this slowing down speed was definitely not a small number. In this way, the gains really did not make up for the losses. At this moment, Lu Feng was in the courtyard of his home, practicing this set of cultivation method. In fact, for Lu Fenglai, the so-called practice was simply something that did not exist. After all, he was the creator of this set of cultivation method. The creator was incomparably familiar with the things he created. Lu Feng was naturally no exception. Rather than saying that he was practicing here, it was better to say that he was continuing to search for the shortcomings of this set of cultivation method. In a flash, he entered a wonderful state. This was not the will to fight, but a tranquil state of battle. This was the special effect brought about by this set of cultivation method created by Lu Feng. In a trance, Lu Feng moved. A light punch, but it was full of many changes. Faintly, there seemed to be a fusion of several kinds of martial skills. The air was slightly vibrating, and the punch actually set off bursts of wind. For a junior warrior to be able to make a punch that could set off the wind of a punch, this was nothing. After all, the definition of a junior warrior was that the physical strength had reached 1 star. And the strength of 1 star could almost easily shatter an ordinary wall that was dozens of centimeters thick. For such a powerful force to be able to set off the flow of air was nothing. But Lu Feng's punch was different, because the wind of the punch he set off was not just that kind of turbulent flow. He seemed to be able to control the direction of the wind of his punch. This was undoubtedly inconceivable. After all, this kind of situation was not something an ordinary junior warrior of the middle level could do, because this kind of setting off indicated that the attacker's control of the technique had reached a very profound level. They can control every hit they make, all the little changes. Both were able to set off the wind of punch. One was an unconscious and undisciplined attack, while the other was a controlled attack that focused on a single point. The power generated by the confrontation between the two naturally could not be compared. After all, the same kind of power, one was scattered and the other was concentrated. The power they generated at a certain point was absolutely different. And at this moment, Lu Feng was in such a situation. Gradually, Lu Feng had begun to change. His movements were getting faster and faster, and in each attack, the essence and skills that were fused were getting more and more. From the beginning of a few kinds, it slowly developed to a dozen kinds, 20 kinds, and finally, when Lu Feng made his last punch, it even reached the level of 40 kinds of essence. And at this time, Lu Feng stopped. On his cheeks, there were traces of sweat dripping down. But Lu Feng did not look tired at all. Between his expression, there was a kind of incomparable excitement. The integration of 40 kinds of essence and skills. My attack just now has reached a kind of peak level. My original explosive power can achieve a 4-fold increase. Plus the 4-fold increase just now, it is already 16 times. 16 times the attack. This can almost reach the level of a mid-level warrior's casual attack. It's a pity that as long as the average mid-level warrior is not too ordinary, they should have comprehended a certain ability. Although it is not necessarily a primary ability, there is no problem in increasing it a little. And my opponent is destined to not be an ordinary person. Only those geniuses are qualified to be my, Lu Feng's, opponent. In this way, even the weakest mid-level warrior, I can't defeat him. Lu Feng slightly pondered, but there was still a kind of satisfaction in his expression. Although he could not defeat a mid-level warrior now. But Lu Feng believed, as long as he stepped into the 3-star standard of a mid-level warrior, the average mid-level warrior should not be his opponent. Thinking of this, Lu Feng still could not help but be excited. After all, before, he could not even become a low-level warrior. And now, he could actually become a little genius who could challenge those of a higher level. Such a change still made him unable to be indifferent. With the existence of the great devil true body, if I want to promote to a mid-level or high-level warrior during the summer vacation, it should not be too big of a problem. After all, I am now in the first realm of the great devil true body, the copper body great devil small success realm. And according to the description, as long as I continue to practice and reach the large success realm, it is enough to be equivalent to a mid-level warrior. When I step into the mid-level warrior, which is the large success realm of the copper body great devil small success realm, I think I can use the heaven-defying magical ability recorded in the great devil true body. Chapter 21. The Great Devil True Body was a heaven-defying supreme cultivation method. It recorded an unparalleled way of cultivation. Naturally, such a heaven-defying cultivation method would not only have simple methods of tempering the body. In addition to being able to rapidly increase the strength of the body, once a person reached the Great Accomplishment Realm, they would be able to learn a heaven-defying magic ability. The magic ability brought about by the Copper Body Great Devil Realm was extremely terrifying. It was called the Great Devil Body. Once it was used, it could summon the invincible Great Devil Shadow that existed in the endless space, giving a certain degree of support. As the cultivation of the Great Devil True Body increased, the support of the Great Devil Shadow would be even more terrifying. Once it was cultivated to the limit, it would be possible to summon the supreme Great Devil to completely descend. Lu Feng did not doubt the existence of such a terrifying creature as the Great Devil in this world. After all, the things that appeared in his mind space were already very unimaginable. Such a situation had occurred before, so the appearance of such a terrifying creature as the Great Devil in this vast sea of stars was nothing. I've already reached the minor accomplishment realm of the Great Devil True Body of the Copper Body Great Devil Realm, but I'm still far from reaching the Great Accomplishment Realm. It's very easy to reach the minor accomplishment realm of the Copper Body Great Devil. According to it, as long as the primitive body is condensed, the minor accomplishment realm can be reached very quickly. However, reaching the Great Accomplishment Realm is not so easy. I really don't know if I can reach the Great Accomplishment Realm during this holiday. Once he reached the Great Accomplishment Realm of the Copper Body Great Devil, Lu Feng would enter the ranks of the Intermediate Warrior. Among ordinary people, an Intermediate Warrior could reach it at the age of 17. This was undoubtedly quite shocking. After all, ordinary people did not have those powerful bloodlines or those powerful potions. For them to be able to reach the Intermediate Warrior at the age of 17 in ordinary people undoubtedly showed that they were very talented. Well, it's decided then. During this holiday, I'll put aside my cultivation as a Psyche Master and focus on cultivating the Great Devil True Body. I'll strive to reach the peak of the minor accomplishment realm of the Copper Body Great Devil before school starts. Compared to the cultivation of the Great Devil True Body, the cultivation of the primitive scripture was undoubtedly much simpler. However, in terms of difficulty, it was much more difficult. This was because the Great Devil True Body was a type of extreme tempering, a type of painful struggle. As long as one's willpower was strong enough, then it would not be too difficult to cultivate it. On the other hand, the Primordial Sutra was different. Although it was easy to cultivate, it was also much more comfortable. All one needed to do was to consume those medicines and absorb them. However, the real situation was not like this. This was because the Primordial Sutra required a terrifying comprehension ability. If one did not comprehend the crux of the matter, then even if one devoured the power of the entire planet, they would not be able to cultivate to the greater mastery realm. As for Lu Feng, he had no confidence in his comprehension of the Primordial Sutra. After all, in his psychic test, his talent could not even be compared to a child's. In addition, Lu Feng had his own plans for choosing to focus on training as a warrior. Those so-called family members from before made Lu Feng realize the importance of power even more clearly. Although the status of a psychic was more honorable, once one was in danger, then the so-called honorable status would be of no use at all. After all, the real role of a psychic was to operate mechas and Star River battleships. When a high-level psychic exploded to the limit, they could even operate large battleships. A large battleship could easily crush hundreds of high-level warriors. However, once it lost the support of technology, then even a mid-level warrior could easily obliterate a high-level psychic. Since he had already made up his mind, Lu Feng did not hesitate anymore. The next moment, he returned to his room, washed off the sweat on his body, and returned to the hall. Looking at the three-dimensional virtual clock in the air, Lu Feng nodded gently. Last time I spoke to Dad and Mom. They said that they were going to conduct a special research, and it seems that today is the day they will leave the research institute. At this time, I should be able to find them. In fact, Lu Feng did not cultivate immediately after the holidays. In addition to wanting to relax, the main reason was that it was not easy for him to cultivate. It was because he did not have money. Picking up the video communicator on the table, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment, but still dialed the number his parents left him. The familiar music continued to play, but there was no answer. Just when Lu Feng thought that his parents had not finished their research, an image suddenly appeared on the screen. The moment he saw this figure, Lu Feng was slightly excited. Because this person was Lu Feng's father, Lu Tao. The last time he saw Lu Tao was during the Chinese New Year. At that time, his parents came back. According to the normal time, his parents should have come back at this time. After all, the BUCC also had holidays. However, because of the so-called research, his parents did not come back this time. And Lu Feng did not mean to blame his parents. He thought that they would only be separated for a while, and he would not miss them too much. After all, this situation had been going on for several years. But this time, when he saw the familiar figure again, Lu Feng felt a little excited. "Dad," he called out the familiar word, but this time, Lu Feng felt a strange emotion. In a trance, he seemed to remember when he was a child, when his parents cared for him and spoiled him. At that time, he was carefree. It was not until later when he realized that he could not cultivate that he finally knew the taste of worry. As a waste, Lu Feng did not feel good, although his parents' attitude towards him did not change. But Lu Feng still felt uncomfortable in his heart. But now it was different, completely different, because he was no longer a waste. When he heard Lu Feng's words, Lu Tao's face also showed a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that came from the bottom of his heart. "Xiao Feng, why are you looking for Dad? I'm really sorry this time. The company's research this time is really too important. Dad and Mom really can't go back." When he heard this, Lu Feng did not show any dissatisfaction like a child. Instead, he nodded in understanding. "Dad, this time I do have something to talk to you about." Hearing this, Lu Tao still had that gentle smile. "Say it. What's the matter? Is there not enough living expenses? How much do you need? Dad will transfer it to you later." Lu Feng nodded gently. In the past, when he looked for Lu Tao, it was mostly because of living expenses. And this time, although it was not for living expenses, it was still for money. "Well, how much do you need this time? You should have finished the college entrance examination by now. I don't know how the exam went. Which university did you apply to? After we are done with this, Mom and Dad will go home and celebrate for you." Lu Tao was also a little apologetic for not being with his son at the most critical moment. It's just that this time the research was too important and the things involved were too big. Even the top figures of the entire BUCC all appeared. So he really had no way to leave. As for whether his son could be admitted to a university, Lu Tao never doubted it. He knew his own child very well. Although Lu Feng didn't have much talent in cultivation, Lu Feng was really a genius when it came to ordinary studies. Although he could not become strong, Lu Tao believed that one day in the future, Lu Feng still had the possibility of being famous in the entire Federation. Looking at his father's slightly proud expression, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of emotion. Although he couldn't cultivate before, his parents were still as proud of him as they were of him. "I applied to the Federal University." When he heard the name Federal University, Lu Tao was obviously stunned, but he quickly nodded gently. "Federal University? Ah, very good, very good. After you come out from there, Dad will arrange it for you. You should be able to directly enter the company." "All right, what major did you apply for?" BUCC Corporation was a giant corporation that spanned across the galaxy. It could be said that the treatment there was definitely one of the best. If one wanted to enter there, it was impossible without a certain outstanding characteristic. It was just that ordinary university graduates did not have the qualifications at all. For a top university like the Federal University, if one did not have outstanding results, it was very difficult to get in. Lu Tao dared to make such a promise, which showed his status in BUCC Corporation. When he heard his father's words, Lu Feng gently shook his head. "Dad, I didn't apply for any major this time. It's because I chose to be a psychic. This time, Lu Tao was really stunned. Psychic, this was such a familiar yet unfamiliar name. To him, a psychic was nothing. Even if it was a real psychic, he would not care much. After all, his existence was really. But at this moment, when he heard that his son had applied to be a psychic at the Federal University, Lu Tao was still silent. He looked at Lu Feng and did not speak for a long time. Looking at his father, Lu Feng knew what he was thinking. He smiled slightly with an inexplicable sense of confidence. Dad, I got in. Moreover, I got in through special enrollment. Lu Tao nodded lightly. He knew that with his identity and status, Lu Feng's school was willing to give him a special enrollment spot. And Lu Feng got into the Federal University just like that. However, when he thought about his son's talent and everything that had happened in the past, Lu Tao's eyes still showed a trace of sadness. But very quickly, this trace of sadness was hidden in the depths of his eyes. Little Feng, you have to remember that some things are predestined. Even if you put in more effort, you might not succeed. But as long as you put in the effort, it's enough. So, even if you can't become a beginner psychic, don't be too depressed. No matter what, in the hearts of your mother and I, you will always be the best. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.